Greetings, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are in the world right now. My name is Raquel Vega Duran, and I am the chair of the Committee on Ethnicity, Migration Rights at Harvard University. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to this Indigenous Women Convening for Peace, Justice, and Reconciliation event. An estimated 476 million Indigenous peoples live in the world across 90 countries and territories. Indigenous peoples speak an overwhelming majority of the world's 7,000 languages and live in 20% of the Earth's territory. A majority of Indigenous peoples face various forms of suppression and rights violations. As a result of their systemic discrimination and political marginalization, Indigenous peoples are among the most vulnerable during conflicts, particularly conflicts happening within the same territory. Peacemaking efforts are usually negotiated at high political levels where Indigenous people are rarely represented. The idea for today's event started last November when I met Vinalaxmi Nepram, who will be participating in the roundtables, and our conversations about the role of Indigenous peoples in the world and the ways in which peace, justice, and reconciliation can be achieved led us to envision an event where Indigenous women's voices from around the world could establish a dialogue on these issues and learn from each other. Today, we bring together Indigenous scholars and women leaders from 7 Indigenous socio-cultural zones of the world to tell stories of militarization, conflict, and exploitation of their Indigenous lands and resources. In the second roundtable, we will discuss collective ways of conflict resolution and peacemaking processes. This event has been organized by the Harvard Committee on Ethnicity, Migration Rights, the Carr Center for Human Rights Policy, the Scholars at Risk program at Harvard University, and the Global Alliance of Indigenous Peoples, Gender Justice and Peace. Special thanks to Jane and Rue, Larissa da Silveira, and A.G. Miura for their hard work on the complex logistics of this event. I would like to start thanking those who will speak today: Rauna Kukanen, Tukumingwak Olsen, Marian Waleta Bubakrin, Vera Solaviova, Vinalaxmi Nepram, Tarsila Rivera-Thea, Lucy Mulenkei, Claire Charters, and Luis Hermama-Bear. I would also like to thank Professor Elsa Stamatopoulos for giving the opening remarks, and Professors Jacqueline Baba and Shelley Lowe for agreeing to moderate the 2 roundtables. And particular thanks to Harvard undergraduate students Alexandra Cassinis, Maya Ramstein, and Alexandria Hall from their Harvard Writing Program, who will graciously transcribe this event. And last but not least, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the sponsors of this event: the Harvard University Native American Program, the Center for the Study of World Religions, the Department of Slavic Languages and Literatures, the Harvard College Writing Program, the Religion, Conflict and Peace Initiative, the Weatherhead Center for International Affairs, and the Committee on Ethnicity, Migration Rights. And I would like to finish my brief introduction with a land acknowledgement. Harvard University is situated on the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Massachusetts people. As a charter creation of the Massachusetts colonies and Commonwealth, Harvard evolved alongside the persistence of the Massachusetts, Nipmuc, and Wampanoag nations. This vibrant place near the Charles River has long served as a site of meeting, exchange, and diplomacy. And today, thousands of Native Americans live in Greater Boston, and tens of thousands reside in the states of Massachusetts. In this event, we honor this past, present, and future of Indigenous Massachusetts. Thank you very much. Now I leave you with Vinalaxmi Nepram, founder director of the Manipur Women Gun Survivors Network and the Control Arms Foundation of India, and the co-founder of the Global Alliance of Indigenous Peoples, Gender Justice and Peace. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Raquel. I'm just saying an opening prayer, an Indigenous prayer from my home state of Manipur in Northeast India, bordering Burma. This prayer was written by me to honor today's event, and written this morning to honor all of us. And I speak this in my native tongue, Manipuri, also called Meiteilon. Ngasigi yai paraba numitsida, pritibigi maikei kaya dagi, ima iben iche ichan. Kayana saruk yabiduna Ekoigi Yelahumigi Iramdam Singda Jataribalan Piri Bachaina Kayasi Naina Naba Kokan Pinaba Malem Semliba Mapuda Kurumjari Yaipa Taujal Nijari Tauna Nijari Tik the Kaidana Mipam Asi Pangtok Pinaba. This indigenous prayer in my native language, which I wrote, simply means on this auspicious day, we, our mothers, our sisters, our families have gathered from around the world to discuss the pain of war and conflicts in our indigenous territories happening for centuries, so as to find our collective peace and justice. To you, O the Creator, we beg for your obeisance. We seek your blessings to give us strength and courage so that we have a fruitful convening today to be able to go ahead in planning our future. Thank you. And I call upon Sushma to deliver her remarks.
Thank you so much, Bina, for your very powerful words, and to Raquel for your acknowledgements and the land acknowledgement. I'm Sushma Raman. I'm the Executive Director of the Carr Center for Human Rights Policy at the Harvard Kennedy School. Conversation with so many distinguished Indigenous women leaders from around the world and with all of you in the audience. The Carr Center is a center at the Kennedy focused on the promotion of human rights. And we are privileged to be in partnership with the Scholars at Risk program to host individuals, brave individuals from around the world who are challenging atrocities, trying to hold governments and corporations accountable. And this year we've been honored to work with them to host Bina Lakshmi Nepram, who is one of the chief organizers for today's conversation. I'd like to thank and now welcome Elsa Stamatopoulou. Elsa is the director of the Indigenous Studies program at Columbia University. She joined Columbia in 2011 after a 31-year service at the United Nations in Vienna, Geneva, and New York, with about 22 years dedicated to human rights and 8 years dedicated specifically to Indigenous peoples' rights. Thank you, Elsa.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Dear colleagues and friends, dear sisters, I would like to congratulate all the sponsors, the organizers of this roundtable on a topic that is so close to Indigenous women's struggles. I bring you greetings from the Institute for the Study of Human Rights and from our Indigenous Peoples' Rights program. And following the established protocol, I would like to recognize the Indigenous people of the land where I find myself today, the Lenape Indigenous people, on whose traditional territory Columbia University stands here in New York. We are living in the challenges of the pandemic and the distances it imposes on us for the benefit of public health. This is why it's especially important to gather together in support and solidarity, despite these challenges, and use the medium of technology to its maximum in order to continue to communicate as people, as women. I would like to pay tribute to all the Indigenous people, victims and survivors of the many conflicts that Indigenous peoples have been experiencing, and to express solidarity for the Indigenous human rights defenders who are prosecuted, imprisoned, and even killed in various countries for defending the rights of their peoples, among them Indigenous women. In many instances, Indigenous women have bravely taken up the roles of mediators and peace builders, have sought to address these issues at the local, national, and international levels. At the UN, Indigenous women have been advocates and leaders since the very first year of the UN Working Group on Indigenous Populations in 1982 in Geneva. They were active participants and contributors during the 2 decades of negotiations regarding the historic UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, adopted in 2007. And they continue to be extraordinary leaders. And we have you here with us today. Indigenous women are not alone. 4 strong, effective social movements in the last decades accompany their struggles: the human rights movement, the women's movement, the indigenous peoples movement, and the peace movement. These movements have had a sustained international profile and their relation with the UN over the decades. Indigenous women symbolize the meeting point of these global social movements. In 2016, the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues focused on Indigenous peoples' conflict and peace. This year again, it will focus on a similar topic: peace, justice, and strong institutions. Hopefully, the ideas and recommendations of this roundtable will feed into the Permanent Forum's process next month. We know that the violence imposed on Indigenous peoples' sovereignty, lands, and cultures also passes over women's bodies as well. At the same time, Indigenous women in many countries have developed dynamic initiatives for peace and conflict resolution at the local and national level. More visibility, documentation, and exchange of their experiences will contribute to peace building. We salute Indigenous women, mothers, sisters, wives, in respect and solidarity for continuing to sustain life and for shaping a vision of a peaceful future. So, in concluding, resistance, persistence, resilience, and vision for life, these are 4 words that embrace Indigenous women's struggles for peace. Through peace-building processes, Indigenous women are writing their own histories and creating more just societies, societies that will follow the fundamental principle of dignity. Thank you, and I wish us every success in this roundtable today.
Thank you, Professor Elsa, for your remarks. I think we are now about to go on to the second, and Raquel, are you there? Professor Jacqueline Baba will be chairing this session. So our next session, we will be having Rauna Tukuminiak, Mariam, Vera, and Tarsila. So we have a little change in program there. So yeah, so we're still awaiting Professor Jacqueline Baba from Harvard University to join us, as she will be moderating. But as we await her joining in, we will just, if we can now request Tarsila, Donna Tarsila, to deliver her remarks, because she needs to go for a funeral later. So Tarsila, Donna Tarsila, I think you should take the floor now.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. And I think now, this time is very, very important to discuss these sensitive issues for our peoples and for our life. And for me, it's very important to share these concerns with academia and indigenous leaders, activists, or strugglers. Because it's not possible to continue talking about the necessity of peace only between us. We need many allied and strong and smart allied organizations. We need to be listened by the people who decide about how to use the power, the political power in our countries. When we talk about peace, we can look and imagine the different kind of violences in our territories, lives, and places, no? Physical and not physical. In my region, when we talk about peace, always talk only in the context of armed conflict. We can remember Guatemala, how indigenous peoples died struggling for peace. Colombia and Peru. I don't know if you know about the conflict in Peru. In the 80s, we had different kind of armed conflict, because in Colombia and in Guatemala, the enemies were very clear. In Peru was terrible, because the Khmer Rouge from Cambodia was imported to indigenous communities, selling the dream of justice. And they profit the situation of exclusion, and I don't know if you say disinformation, no information in the communities. And many years, our indigenous peoples believe that we don't have right in the state. And we had this terrible conflict where one group said, this is your revolution, this is justice for you, you will have right. And our people believe that because they don't know about what happened outside of the community. After came the army and said, this is not your revolution, you are terrorists, and killed to our people, to principal leaders in the communities. I come from one community where we lost, I think, more than 85 strong leaders. Until now, we don't have where are the bodies. This is related about the reconciliation, for example. What's the meaning of reconciliation in this case, or in this kind of situations? We are listening what happened in some parts of Asia now, in this century. And we try to understand again who are committed to build a peace in our territories. We are giving our hopes, our lives, and trying to be listened. And I think it's necessary to include to our analysis the concept of racism as ideology. Because the racism in the power are using this power to kill others, because they think that we don't have the same rights as others. The other concept is necessary to include is the consequences of colonization and what is happening with new colonization, and what is happening with this concept and our hopes of rights. As our Professor Elsa spoke about the advances, we believe on peace, and we try to use the official mechanisms, going with hope to United Nations, using the chart of United Nations. We are going in my region to OAS. We are trying to talk with the governments, with governors, with politicians. And what is the result, my dears? I think it's necessary to be more strong and more clear about how we can contribute from you, from politicians, to resolve this unpeaceful world. No? In this case, I think it's very important to organize that kind of seminars and to be more open for discussions and try to convince that we are struggling for peace, not only for us, not only for indigenous peoples, not only for women. We are struggling and visioning the future of the societies, of the human being. And I think it's necessary to give very important time, content in the places of formation, like the university, like the school, and open or public education too. Why? Because we think that in universities, we have new politicians, new experts, new people who will participate in the decision-making positions in different levels of power, no? In the regions, in communities, in governments, and in international mechanisms. That's why, for me, it's very important to think about all these issues and not discuss isolated. Because many times when we talk as indigenous women, as indigenous peoples, the official society said, oh, you want new and special rights. We are not struggling for special rights, because if we have peace in our territories, in our society, in our countries, in our life, we will give the best for all, for life. And that is not only for a specific small place. I arrived to United Nations on 87. I'm very fortunate to arrive to United Nations because in my place, we were killed, I think 15 indigenous, 15,000 indigenous peoples, and the official society say nothing about indigenous peoples dying there. And when we and me arrived to United Nations, we discovered that mechanism where we can show the picture of indigenous girls violated with bayonet, I don't know how to say the army, and terrible pictures sent by indigenous communities. After, as you know, from 80s to this year, we are struggling how indigenous women were violated in this armed conflict sexually, and trying to have justice, because we need to be recognized as object of this kind of violations as women, as girls, as young women in the communities. What happened with official society? Nobody said, this is not good. We support your struggle. It's like we are talking only for us. We are talking only isolated. That's why we think that the opportunity that we have with new technology, with this kind of reflections, we need to sharing our strategies and how do you say, point of views, try to build very effective way to transit to the people who never listen or who never imagine how is suffered the violence in excluded cultures or societies. That's my how do you say, my thoughts for you. I try to follow where we have very good examples to find justice or peace. In these examples, we follow the issue of from Colombia, from Guatemala to Peru, and now to Colombia. Colombia, okay, it's new context, but the leaders are dying each month. What happened with the peace agreement in Peru, in the Amazon? After many years, we never think that a woman will be killed by other persons. This week, we had an Ashaninka woman killed by traffickants of, I think, the lands, territory, because the narcotraffic or trafficant of woods. And when we try to defend our life, our rights, our territory, always we find we lost the life, but nobody said, okay, we will support you. We don't want to see or listen about people dying each day. No. In this context of COVID, what happened? Nothing, my dear. That's why we need to be very clear what is happening in different regions with in different countries, and where we have a good example to follow, that good example to change the situation. We think that in the North or Europe, the situation is better. But when we talk about racism and discrimination and violence with indigenous women, we think, okay, it's different color, but exist, no? That's why it's very important I think we are now globalized as indigenous peoples, as strugglers, using the new technology. And always I hope that many of us can be listened from grassroots with academy and with, how do you say, thinkers and decision makers, no? That's very, very important. And thank you very much for your time, for listening me, and for all who made the possibility to have this opportunity, no? The university, the institute, you, and all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tarsia, for your comments, and good morning to everybody, and my sincere apologies for being so late. I had a personal emergency which I had to deal with, but I'm very happy to be here, so apologies again. But this is such a important and powerful and moving set of discussions. And Tarsia, I think your comments were extraordinarily wide-ranging, moving right from, you know, experiences of destruction and decimation and degradation at the grassroots level to the fight forward and the political acuity and impact of indigenous communities, as now, as you rightly said, people are organized as a global constituency and speaking right from the grassroots to the, you know, highest levels of governance. So thank you for those really powerful comments. So our next speaker is Rauna, and look forward to your comments, and the floor is yours. I think, as you all know, you have about 8 to 9 minutes. So please go ahead. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Vuore päivi puhkaita. Mulla on Jouna ja Anne Kirsti Räynä. Seas eiret saamis tervuota täppe muhtamäelmis puhkaita. Good afternoon. Greetings from Sapmi and the Arctic Circle, the Sami territory in northern parts of Scandinavia and northwest corner of Russia. It's already afternoon here. Thank you so much for organizing this important event. Thank you to Pina also for your beautiful prayer. Raquel, Shusma, Elsa, and all the other organizers and sponsors, and greetings also to other speakers and all the participants. In my brief remarks, I'd like to share a pressing a dilemma that we, the Sami, have been faced with for the past few years. And that is addressing climate change and its impact on traditional indigenous livelihoods, especially reindeer herding, which has come to head in Scandinavia, especially in Norway. As we know, climate change and environmental degradation pose an existential threat to our planet and the human race. And we know about extreme weather, but also it's evident in the connection between unprecedented biodiversity loss and its linked to spread of disease. The European Commission has established a set of policy initiatives known as the European Green Deal, which aims to make Europe climate neutral by 2050. The EU Green Deal is seen as the roadmap to sustainable and resource-efficient economy. According to the European Commission, sustainable and resource-efficient economy can be achieved by, and this is a quote from them, turning climate and environmental challenges into opportunities and making the transition just and inclusive for all. One of the main ways states have been doing this is through investing in environmentally friendly technologies. And this has become known as the green shift. Norway was among the first countries to start discussing the green shift nearly a decade ago. And in the recent years, it has been at the forefront in pushing for reducing carbon emissions through, for example, the electrification of transport. The central but also controversial in this process has been the drastic increase of wind industry. The country has seen a boom in wind power development in the past few years, but also public protests with environmental campaigners accusing some developers of building larger turbines than originally approved, obscuring landscapes and endangering birds. And there are also other actors that have been opposing. So there's been kind of a backlash against this from various sectors. However, this industry is very much backed by the government and obviously industry. And many of the onshore projects have been built in northern parts of Norway and often in the area central to reindeer herding, which is the main Sami traditional livelihood. For this reason, for the Sami, wind energy is not seen as a climate justice or a way to address climate change, but rather a pressing climate injustice. Research has shown that reindeer avoid areas where wind turbines are in operation, and recent studies show that the distance is 10 kilometers, so reindeer doesn't go closer than 10 kilometers to the operating wind turbines. What this means in practice is that these areas are lost to reindeer herding. Yet almost on a daily basis, we see in the news, we see wind industry representatives in the news arguing that it is possible for the massive turbines and reindeer to coexist. And this is, they are finding ways that they coexist so we can go ahead in our planning and proceed as they have planned. In addition to the turbines, wind industry requires obviously infrastructure, often massive road construction and power lines. And these are always or often in areas that previously undisturbed by humans. So land that people in the wider society might view as wilderness, it is, however, the foundation for of the Sami culture. There are several ongoing court cases brought by reindeer herding districts against wind industry, especially in Norway. In Nordland region in Norway, South Sami reindeer herders have filed a lawsuit against Øyfjellet wind energy initiative. Indigenous communities say that these planned turbines will interfere with migration paths. And the lawyer for the Sami reindeer herders and representing the district says that the proposed wind farm violates the Reindeer Herding Act by disturbing these migration routes that are critical for when the reindeer herds are migrating between the seasons. So if these routes aren't available or cannot be used, the herders will not be able to get the reindeer to or from the winter pastures. And this can lead to necessary reduction of the herd, which will mean that one or several traditional Sami reindeer herders will no longer have sufficient economic basis for their livelihood. Another example is close to where I'm from, right on the border between Norway and Finland, a huge mountain range area known as the Rastegaisa. It is a sacred mountain range where it's a joint initiative between Norway and Finland planning to establish the largest wind industry park in Europe, which would contain 270 wind turbines in the area of size of 10,000 football fields, roads and power lines. And this would cover or impact mainly four reindeer herding districts. 3 of these 4 districts have adamantly opposed this development, as well as the key municipalities around the region or in the region. However, this planning is ongoing, and they also emphasize that it is possible for reindeer and wind energy to coexist. There are other areas, such as Sallir in Troms region, where reindeer herding districts have already lost their pastures. For the family of Sami woman called Risten Turi Alexandersen, Norway's green shift has been a disaster, as 68 wind turbines and a road built on their winter pastures and calving areas has made this land inaccessible. She notes, this was in the news recently, she talked about how the construction was extremely disruptive to their livelihood due to the construction traffic to the site. And she also questions the green shift during the construction sites, such as trucks delivering 50,000 liters of diesel per week for 6 months to the site. So she asks, what is the energy consumption and the CO2 footprint of the construction of the wind energy? The president of the Sami parliament in Norway, Aili Keskitalo, calls this wind energy industry construction as green colonialism. And she says that we have already given so much to the Nordic countries in terms of forestry, hydro development, other resources, tourist resorts being also built on reindeer herding areas, that there's nothing left to give. Like the pressure to these areas that to the mainstream society appear vacant or accessible, like areas where not much is happening. And also, for instance, in that area I mentioned, Rastekaisa, which is also a sacred Sami mountain range, they talk about that there's not so much biodiversity. There's that it's kind of a barren land, that it's suitable for this kind of, it's not disturbing the biodiversity. And also research shows that those arguments are often not true. In this case, they aren't true. Elsewhere in other indigenous communities, they have also talked about and raised concerns about this wind energy development. Members talk about it as an ethnocide or ecocide or genocide through which the state and wind energy companies are destroying and slowly killing them. They make the connection, this temporal continuity of this colonial project and link this wind energy development to the previous colonial activities, and show that it's very much the same process of the kind of intrusive colonial behavior, unequal benefit sharing, disregard for public consultation, or seriously considering, actually hearing what indigenous people, indigenous communities are saying. Like it's not enough to hear, but also take it into consideration, as well as the obvious cultural and ecological impacts of the wind parks. So this, in conclusion, we can say that this green economy emerges in this kind of shadow of conventional fossil fuel production, presenting itself as a solution and a pathway to slow the effects of ecological, climate and economic crisis. Although it might present itself as the least destructive fossil fuel-based technology, it, however, doesn't change the logic of elimination and extermination that affects so deeply indigenous communities, but also animals and plants living on the land. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you for those really very rich and thought-provoking comments. And I think what you did is identify a specific set of issues which have enormous implications for the whole discussion about new technologies as ways of addressing climate change, and this kind of a critique both of the lack of consultation, the lack of proper documentation of the impact on affected communities is actually a much broader issue, of course. It stretches way beyond the question of wind to all sorts of issues to do with new technologies, you know, electric cars and so on. So this is really a whole chapter that I think you've opened for us, which is enormously rich and very uncharted in many ways in mainstream discussions. So I hope we'll come back to this in the discussion, but thank you. So our next speaker is Mariam Walid Abu Bakrin, and I apologize for not introducing you, Rana, which I should have done. And maybe I can just say, for those of you who don't know Rana, that she is a professor of Arctic Indigenous Studies at the University of Lapland in Finland. So now we're moving on to Mariam, who is the president of the Association Tinhinan Canada and a member of the Tinhinane Sahel. So Mariam, the floor is yours, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Jacqueline. I don't know if you can see my, okay. So I'm very privileged to address you today from the Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory, where I find myself today in Ottawa. I would like to thank all the people in the Harvard Committee on Ethnicity, Migration Rights, as well as the Carr Center for Human Rights there, by the leadership of the ladies Raquel Vega-Duran and Sushma Rahman and yourself, Jacqueline, but also my sister Bina, whose leadership bring us together under the Global Indigenous People, Gender and Justice and Peace, and our friends and sisters. I'm thinking about Elsa Stamatopoulos, but also all the sisters who are in the call. So thank you very much. Thanks for this first stage that given to our global Indigenous women. So today I'm a kind of revolutioning in a way that I will present this very important topic for me, but also for my people. And I just want to say that today I'm addressing you on my own capacity, not on a representing anyone. So I have been asked to talk about this topic of conflict militarization and exploitation of indigenous peoples and land and resources. And I chose to name my presentation Tanfustin Weltshetamashak. That means the narrative of indigenous, of the Tuareg woman. So for the next minute, what I will talk about is what is Tenere for us, or Ekal, which is land, for us, the Kaltamashak, and what has become Tenere or Ekal, and Mahina Wadni Shetamashak, that means what impact on the Tuareg women. And lastly, I will look into the role or share my perspective on the role of Tuareg women in conflict resolution. So I'm not following the, okay, yeah, here, great. So now, I'm sorry. So for the Tuareg territory, here we can see the that there is a territory named Tenere. We name it Tenere, but you can see in the gray part, this is the Tuareg territory. But if we see there are lines that are the colonial borders that separated the territory, and this is also separating people and family, and it's not respecting our way of life and our connections, either our livelihood, because we are pastors and we practice pastoralism. And for us, what is Tenere? What is Akal? It's a land without border. It's the linkage between our confederacies, the one here of Kel Ahjar, Kel Ahgar, Kel Adra, Kel Tadamakat, Kel Iwilimiden, Kel Azawa. So that means for us also Akal. And for us, Tenere means also the calm that we can find in the desert. That all that encompasses what is our land and what is Tenere for us. But let's see in the next slide what has become Tenere. And I found this song of Tinariwen, a very well-known Tuareg musician band that shared this poem. And the metaphor here for the elephants are the people, are all the armed group, the people who came into our land and just destroying, not only killing the people, because when it's people we count, but there is other beings and life that are destroyed, the biodiversity, as my sister Rona said earlier, the biodiversity is destroyed, the culture is destroyed, our memories are destroyed. So here I will just take the time to read with you what Tenere has become. The Tenere has become an upland of thorns where elephants, so I said the metaphor of elephant are all the extractive, the military that came into our land, fight each other, crushing tender grass underfoot. And here tender grass is not only people, it's also, as I said, the other element of the nature, what made biodiversity. The gazelles have found refuge high in the mountains. The birds no longer return to their nest at night. The camps have all fled, and the camps are our traditional habitat. You can read the bitterness on the faces of the innocents during this difficult and brushing time in which all solidarity has gone. We feel that no one is there with us. The strongest impose their will and leave the weakest behind. Many have died battling for twisted ends, and joy has abandoned us, exhausted by all this duplicity. And the duplicity is in a lot of things, even in how the conflicts in our region, in our Tenere is solved. Next. Now, still in what has become Tenere, so from our very nice dunes of sand or the very nice rockies and mountains that we have, that's what become Tenere. We can see here the first image where it's written Algeria. So I put a representation of the 5 countries where Tuareg people are now find themselves in new borders. So in Algeria, you can see Inamenes gas extraction fabric or mine here. And then up, you can see in Burkina Faso, Ayamgol, which is a Canadian mining, and it's on Isekan, which is a Tuareg name of it's one of its desert land. We have then Libya, a Tuareg kid. Who is just among ruins of the houses that has been destroyed by the invasion of the OTAN. The I don't know the name of OTAN in English, but it's the forces of the forces that intervened in 2011 there in Libya, and that's how they left the Tuareg kids and people without no hope there in Libya. Then we come in the image of Mali with the MINUSMA, the multi-dimension mission of UN in Mali, and this is exactly in my own land in Timbuktu, and we can see the number of militaries higher than local people there invading our wide lands. And finally, here we can see Niger also in the Tuareg land of Imurar, one of the biggest French mining of uranium. So that's what our Tenere become. And I can just summarize it in the course of natural resources. Then I bring you to what the Tuareg women become on that. So Mahin Awadan Tamashak, so means in English, there is no exact word in English for that, but it's like the impact if I say that. And it's important for me to say it in a way that we, the Tuareg women, feel it. So there are a lot of things to understand what are the impact on the Tuareg women. Let me share with you this wisdom of Tuareg people, or saying that says, that means that the woman is the pillar of the society. So we are the ones who protect the culture. We are the one who educate. We are the ones who heal. We are the ones who learn how to heal and all the healing practices. We are the ones who know where are the plants for healing. And if there is a conflict, how will you be able to transmit the culture, the education, and where will we find the plants in the new lands where we find ourselves and where we don't know anything about, like me here, or like my sisters and mothers who are in the refugee camps, or who made the slums in the cities. So this is, in just a few words, what are the impact on Tuareg women and Mahnarina Wadani. And now I'm coming to my last slide. What is Shetamashak's role in conflict resolution? And here again, I bring you back to a Tuareg legend on the Imzad, which is a kind of violin, a traditional violin, only played by women in our community. And the legend behind this instrument is that there were Tuareg men who were fighting, and the people made all what they can to end the fact, but they were not able. And that lady went and built this instrument. It's all natural made, and handmade, and she made this instrument and started to play it, and the men came and sit together and listen. And this is what is the power of indigenous women in general, and the Tuareg women, the power of bringing back peace and bringing back calm and healing, because this instrument also has a healing place in our community. Just to summarize and maybe say that we, as for example, Elsa said, this year, the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues will focus on SDG 16, which is peace, justice, and strong institutions. There were several international instruments, including the UN DRIP, that calls for attention to indigenous women in particular, but also youth and elders, but also the main role of indigenous peoples in resolution of conflict that affecting them. We have also the UN Resolution 1325 that put in the heart the role of women in prevention and resolution of conflict. So all that is known, but yet we do not see a meaningful place and participation of indigenous women within the spaces of prevention and resolution of conflict. Either we don't see a specific mechanism dedicated to indigenous people's resolution mechanism of conflict. So if I have one recommendation to conduct, and you can find it already in the UN Permanent Forum session on 2016 report, that we need a specific mechanisms at all level, international, regional, and national level, on how to solve conflict that affecting indigenous peoples. So this is my last word, and I really want to again to thank you for listening me, but also let's develop this sisterhood and this thought to really come back maybe next year in person, either in Harvard or Columbia Institute, as they used to host us at the pre-session, to celebrate a mechanism on the resolution of conflict affecting indigenous peoples. Tanim Mertuhul, and thank you for listening.
Mariam, thank you for that magnificent presentation. Thank you for that powerful account of, you know, what people call intersectionality, the coming together of an indigenous history, culture, politics perspective on the one hand, and the feminism and the legacy of kind of the strong female space in the culture that you discuss, and the way in which these two powerful traditions really need to be given or to claim a much greater space and voice. I also thought it was fascinating after Rana's presentation, which really interrogated some of the impact of so-called new technologies, to look at your account of the old technologies which are destroying this whole area and how this is continuing. So thank you so much for that. And we'll come back, I'm sure, to this in the conversation. So our next speaker is Vera Soloyeva. Sorry, my little grandson has just appeared, but Vera Soloyeva, who's a PhD candidate at George Mason in the Department of Environmental Science and Public Policy. So Vera, thank you so much for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for the organizing this event, and for the special prayer, and for the very powerful and informative talks of my previous speakers. So I will share my screen with you. That was my PowerPoint. Okay. And thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. My presentation is actually it's actually about the conflict, militarization, and exploitation of indigenous land and resources, because the main struggle for indigenous peoples in Russia relates to land and natural resources rights. You probably already know that Russian Federation has not endorsed the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and didn't ratify ILO Convention 169. And unfortunately, it is a really big issue, because there's also a hidden issue in the Russian legislation that prevent to effectively address this problem, the problem of the rights of indigenous people to land and natural resources. That issue is that not all indigenous people are recognized as indigenous in the Russian Federation. To explain in more in details, let me introduce first my homeland, the Republic of Sakha-Yakutia, where it's located. And I would like to show how important the matter of definition by comparison of two environmental disasters that happened recently in Russian north, when two giant mining industries polluted river Yenisei and Lena. So first is Nornickel, the world's largest producer of palladium and one of the largest producers of nickel, platinum, and copper, located in Krasnoyarsk Krai. And there was a spill of diesel in 2020 when river Yenisei was polluted. And another case is about that Alrosa, it's a leader of the world diamond mining industry, which is located in my homeland in the Republic of Sakha-Yakutia. So I will start my PowerPoint from the map of the Russian Federation. And you can see that it's like this Russian Federation constituted from 85, from 85 federal subjects, where 22 are ethnic republics. My homeland is Republic of Sakha-Yakutia. It's located in the northeastern part of Russian Federation. And there many indigenous people live in the same territory like Aven, Chukchi, Yukagir, and Evenki people. However, these ethnic groups have different rights and recognition status under Russian legislation. In Russia, ethnic groups are officially recognized as indigenous with some special protective status only when the population is smaller than 50,000 individuals. Other native people whose population is bigger than 50,000 people, they called as large number or titular nations, but they're not recognized as indigenous. And even they are that large number of people, they are even within the scope of UN accepted description of indigenous peoples. Because of this legislation name, Sakha, Tatar, Buryat, Bashkir, Kalmyk, and other large number of ethnic groups who live in different ethnic republics are not officially recognized as indigenous, despite that many of them still preserve traditional lifestyle on their ancestral land and have their distinct cultures, traditions, languages, and religions. The matter of definition is very important because this blurs the self-identification of large number of indigenous people, many of them that they don't know that they are actually indigenous. But not by not being recognized as indigenous, large number of indigenous peoples of the Russian Federation are excluded from the federal programs aimed to support indigenous culture, language, and traditional ways of life. And finally, all international tools and mechanisms, including international assessment and programs developed to better defend the rights of indigenous peoples, overlook problems of the larger number of indigenous peoples in the Russian Federation, leaving them invisible. Not recognition means that the large number of people, indigenous people, can't effectively protect their rights and their environment. It is unfortunate because my homeland is very rich in natural resources. Here is a map where large deposits of natural resources marked. Overall, 82% for diamonds, 20% for gold, 61% for uranium, 82% for antimony and other kind of all Russian natural minerals deposits are located within my territory of my republic. Mining activities in Russia are usually undertaken with the little concern for the environment, polluting air, soil, and drinking water. As a result of the careless attitude toward nature, serious deterioration of the environment occurred. Ecological problems also became a litmus of the problem related to the recognition of the indigenous status under Russian legislation. For example, there's like two environmental disaster happened recently in the Russian Federation when two giant mining industries polluted rivers. The first case was a large spill of diesel happened in May 2020 when 20,000 tons of diesel fuel leaked into the soil and river near the city of Norilsk. This news, including news about rights of indigenous small number of people who was affected by this environment disaster, was distributed all around the world, making headlines in many newspapers and TV news. Another case is also about environmental disaster that happened in the Republic of Sakha-Yakutia in August 2018, when several dams of the diamond mining company Alrosa broke down and the heavily polluted, highly mineralized water where some contaminants exceeded the legal limits hundreds of times, got into the river Lena and Veluy, that was the only source of drinking water for many local peoples, for many indigenous people, and then end up to the Arctic Ocean. However, almost nobody know about this environmental disaster in the Russian Federation as well in around the world. It is despite the active protest and social and environmental activism of indigenous people in the Sakha Republic, when thousands of people came out to protect River Lena. So I just was curious to compare the news about the Nor-Nickel pollution and about the Alrosa pollution. So I just Googled it, two words, Nor-Nickel pollution and Alrosa pollution, and you can see that's like a Nor-Nickel pollution. It's like I made a lot of news that that words pollution, and it's about that there was about the rights of indigenous people. And how about here that about the Alrosa, you can see that Alrosa mostly it's about environmental protection, corporate social responsibility, and diamonds, and other kind of nice things about this company. And only one article was related to the compensation related to the damage of the river. So I decided to make it my research a little bit, expand to my research, and I just put indigenous. And you can see here, like indigenous again, like you can see that indigenous people call of Nor-Nickel's global partner to not to buy nickel. And there's like people actually was thinking about that history of indigenous people's rights. About the Alrosa pollution and indigenous, this like again sustainable development of the Arctic and Alrosa among leaders of environmental and sustainable life. So just environmental policy. You can see that's like a attention to Alrosa disaster. It's actually there's no attention at all, right? But I can say that like people in our republic, they were very actively tried to defend our river and our ecology. And so unfortunate that world didn't see that. And we cannot just relate to any mechanism, to any institutions of that around that international community who can actually can listen to us. You know, so it's like no, because it is because that institutionals, they follow Russian legislation, and they usually, when they make assessment or they make programs that defending that indigenous people rights, they usually counted only small numbered indigenous people. So about the compensation, because of this like a big attention that world paid to the Nornickel, I just pretty sure that Russia and that Nornickel had to somehow answer that that demand of that, you know, that environmental justice. So Nornickel paid around $2 billion to budget for damage to water body, and then compensation for damage to soil. It was 9.8 million, and they paid to the Norilsk municipal government, and part of it will go to indigenous people. How about Alrosa, that it was in the Republic of Sakha-Yakutia? It will transfer like around 2.2 million to the Generations Fund of Yakutia to provide clean drinking water to residents of the affected villages. And then the company also plans to independently finance scientific expedition to study the status of the rivers. And also Alrosa paid a fine of 50,000 rubles or $714 for violating water use conditions. So you can see that's like a huge differences in compensation, in attention between two actually that huge environmental disasters. So I think that ecological disaster in the Sakha Republic left invisible, particularly because that all international institutions follow the Russian legislation, as I said previously. And they didn't pay attention to the large number of indigenous people's problems. So what the ways of peace, justice, and reconciliation mechanism in this situation? I think that's like a diversity very important. It's supposed to be a recognition of the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples that adopted in 2007. It's supposed to be recognition by Russian Federation. It will contribute to peaceful resolution of many conflicts related to land and natural resources rights, and will allow us, that indigenous people, take care of our land and use it sustainably. However, I know that it's a very long process. So meanwhile, to reach this destination, I think that it's very important to educate people and world about this problem. And I hope that international institutions and programs developed to defend the rights of indigenous peoples should start to pay attention to the issue of recognition of the indigenous status of large number of indigenous people in the Russian Federation. And that's it. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm very happy to participate in conversation.
Thank you very much. That was another incredibly rich set of comments. Thank you so much for raising the definitional question, which I think is critical, and for highlighting the way in which you can invisibilize whole populations simply by terminological means. And of course, this question of who gets counted and what gets counted is also what gets dealt with and what has any political traction. So I think that framing was very powerful. I also think that comparison that you set out between the two totally different situations is very useful as a way of understanding what political leverage delivers. I mean, we can discuss, I don't know how optimistic you are about whether recognition declaration what it'll deliver. It's interesting to consider that as a strategy. I'm sure you're right to include that in the list, but of course we all know that as you rightly said, that's a long path. But it's a step, and the process of of getting that recognized, of course, is a way also of raising public awareness, and also maybe of broadening the coalitions, because we're talking about all sorts of different communities who are affected by these extractive technologies. So thank you. That was another really incredibly rich presentation. We have so many points to discuss. So let me just turn to our final speaker on this panel, Kumin Kwag Olsen, forgive me for mispronouncing your name, who is an Inuit Circumpolar Council and member of the Board of Trustees at the UN's Voluntary Fund for Indigenous People, in a very important forum. So the floor is yours. Thank you too for joining us today, Tukumika.
Koyana, thank you. And thank you all for the very important presentations made and really nice prayer of Bina. We Inuit, we live in 4 countries with 4 different colonizers. So our organization, Inuit Circumpolar Council, ICC, have been very important to our collective voice and indigenous rights. So we have 4 offices in 4 countries. We live in Greenland, Canada, Alaska, and Chukotka, Russia. ICC have adopted the Circumpolar Inuit Declaration on Sovereignty in the Arctic in 2009 to acknowledge and recognize our right to self-determination. The Inuit Declaration on Sovereignty is central to our rights as people and the right to self-determination. It is our right to freely determine political status, freely pursue our economic, social, cultural, and linguistic development, and freely dispose of our natural wealth and resources. States are obligated to respect and promote the realization of our right to self-determination. So the Sovereignty Declaration declares Inuit as united people, as one people, through Inuit lives across a far-reaching circumpolar region representing the 4 countries that I mentioned. Our sense of unity is fostered through our organization. So Inuit sovereignty is not located in a territorial bound or state, or even in a local Inuit governments. Instead, sovereignty is in relations between Inuit physical ties to Arctic lands and territory. So we all have very different governments, where, for example, in Greenland, we have gained self-government from Denmark. We, the Inuit, the indigenous peoples of Greenland, are the majority within our own country. Also, Denmark affirms Inuit in Greenland as indigenous peoples in the constitution and affirms that Inuit are the only indigenous peoples within the Kingdom of Denmark. Consistent with the distinct status as indigenous peoples, ICC is happy with the good cooperation that ICC has with Denmark for decades. The government of Denmark have recognized and affirmed the rights of Inuit of Greenland and engaging with them as such as the national level, working collaborative with them, with us in the international level, and various indigenous specific fora in the UN and European Union, international whaling commissions, and elsewhere. With that said, the last few years, we have been taking notice of that the present administration of Naalakkersuisut, our government of Greenland, have not just in one statement, but on several occasions been expressing the view that indigenous rights will be more and more irrelevant as more self-governing Greenland becomes in reality. This is very concerning and serious concern especially if it's being understood as an attempt to undermine or denying our Inuit rights, our distinct status as indigenous peoples, and is a violation of our right to self-determination. This highlights that working for our rights is a continuous and important objective that we can never take, and we can never take our rights for granted. So we hope advocating for indigenous rights as well for UNDRIP will continuously be spread across the states. So we are still fighting equality and justice. This year, 2021, is 300 years ago the colonization started in Greenland. Some visions from our politicians have been that this year we should become independent from Denmark. But it seems that the assimilation and wanting to keep Greenland within the kingdom of Denmark have never been strong as now, since former president Mr. Trump tried to buy our country back in 2019 because Arctic is now the sexy topic. It feels like Denmark have been sizing up their activities and strategies within the Arctic. And this situation started or happened first with a letter from an organization called Uranamik, No to Uranium. They sent a letter to our former mining minister asking about our rights as indigenous peoples in mining projects. And the minister in an official letter is saying that something we think is very concerning. He's saying that indigenous rights will be more relevant the more independence we gain from the Kingdom of Denmark. This also been said with another minister, this time with a foreign minister, during a UPR hearing this December in Nuuk, the capital of Greenland. We have, of course, highlighted that the rights holders are the people, not the government. But it seems like there is a misunderstanding of the rights from the government. And we have asked about who is advising the government about human rights issues, and no answer yet. It will be interesting what changes will be after the Greenland election, 6th of April, which is very soon. And we, of course, hope for positive changes for our rights, because this is undermining our rights as indigenous peoples and violation of self-identification right as indigenous peoples, as I already said. So the goal for the government sitting right now is to open an open pit mine, open uranium pit mine, including hazardous materials like uranium, thorium, and more in South Greenland. The closest community is just 5 to 8 kilometers away, and the whole area is agricultural area with sheep. We had a zero tolerance towards uranium mining, and this was lifted for Greenland by the Greenland Parliament by 1 vote majority. According to the New Deal between Greenland and Denmark, when Greenland government was introduced in 2009. The background for this political wish for to open uranium mining is that the mineral and, for example, oil exploitation is believed to be the economic foundation for an independent Greenland state. For the time being, there is a mineral exploitation project by an Australian company which intends to exploit the uranium as well as a byproduct. The project is heavily disputed as environmental concerns in the public area are deemed either not fully covered in the obligatory environmental report of the company nor trustworthy. when the company claims that there would be no risk associated with the project. The general provisions of all licenses that any mineral exploitation should not harm the environment or the wildlife nor human beings. The people in South Greenland have several times raised that they feel they are not being heard and not getting adequate information. When they ask about more details in the issues, no one come up with answers, and the information that is available is very ununderstandable as it is translated to our languages. So it is for them very hard to take a position, and free prior informed consent is not withheld here either. In my university, I also heard stories like the audience in public hearings. They have to send their questions before the hearing starts, like before they get the information about what's going to happen. And this is very wrong. There is much more else to share, including about our traditional hunters being highly discriminated and about indigenous knowledge, but I think let this be for another time. We are all now just waiting for the election to happen and see what changes will be. But it should not be like this. We should not have to wait for the changes to be made from election to election. We need a clear, straight politics that is future-looking and not just temporary looking. And there seems to be an understanding among some Arctic states that the implementation of indigenous self-determination is like a level up in human rights, and therefore rights as indigenous peoples not relevant. And this again highlight that working for our rights is constant and that we can never take our rights for granted. And we hope our work to advocate for distinct rights of indigenous peoples as well as implementation of UNDRIP will continuously be spread across the states. And I look forward to be working with you to promote peace and indigenous peoples' rights. And thank you.
Thank you so much for that powerful and moving presentation. I think you raised many themes which are cross-cutting, going back to the question of the impact on animals, which was raised earlier in the context of wind power, but also this whole question about the relationship between indigenous people as a political entity and states and state divisions and state formation. You started off by saying that your indigenous community is spread amongst 4 different nation states. You then focus most of your comments on Greenland, but it was very interesting to think about the complexity of the political struggle that you're facing with this kind of divided territory. So we now have just under 15 minutes for discussion. And again, I want to apologize to all of you for being a little bit late to join this magnificent panel, and I'm so sorry about that. But, and of course, as you all know, one of our panelists has had to leave, sadly, though she's already asked for links to the discussion so she can join us, virtually later. But in the time we have, maybe I could just kick off with the first question, but I think we should have this as an open opportunity of exchange of views between you. But I wanted to start off just responding to your rich presentations by asking all of you to reflect maybe on who you see as the most important allies that can be brought into this movement, because clearly indigenous women's organizations, or indeed indigenous people's organizations alone, are fighting against very powerful economic and political interests, where there's disproportionate access to power, to media, to all sorts of powerful political tools that many of you already mentioned. And you just mentioned the last presentation about the difficulty even of getting accurate translation into your languages of what's at stake. So it seems to me that one of the critical issues moving forward, apart from getting ratification of international documents that already exist, is the question of alliances. Who are the most likely progressive forces that can or should be brought into this struggle for justice? And I wondered if you'd like to just start with maybe that. I think it relates to all the presentations, whether you're talking about the Tuareg, whether you're talking about Russia, whether you're talking about, the situation in Finland, or the situation that you just described in Greenland. I think it's relevant to all these situations. So that would be my opening comment, but then we can, discuss any issue that you would like to. So let's just open it up and see who'd like to jump in. And I think it doesn't have to be just the panelists who've spoken. I think that Elsa, Bina, all of you, please jump in as well.
Mariam has her hand, so she will. I think it's better the panelist.
I can't see Mariam for some reason. Why isn't she on my screen? Let's see. Anyway, please go ahead, Mariam. Oh, yes. Oh, I see. Sorry. Right. Okay, Mariam, please go ahead.
No, if Bina want to speak, she goes ahead.
No. I was alerting that your hand is raised.
Okay, great. So this is really a good question about who to be our allies. Like, and it's a very tough one because because this really to be very strategic. And we do see a lot of people in our lands presenting themselves as our allies. Are they? So maybe now with the international social movement, what I feel now is that the international social movement can make changes. We do see what happened in US with the anti-racism movement. We do see on the climate change still, even if we didn't get like magical results, but still it echoed everywhere. So regarding what our communities are going through, and that is silenced and kind of accepted and becoming normal, I think that we should get all the powerful spaces in our side, like the space that you are opening to us today, changing and bringing the narrative together, bringing the what called science and researches at the academic level, braided with our own narrative as people, which are not separated what we feel as women, as indigenous peoples. So this is really key to document, to generate data that are meaningful for us and that can sensitize or raise awareness at all stages. So this is the first alliance or friends we have to make. Then there is the changing makers, or the ones who has power. So the thinking is there. How can we together, so with these alliance made, influence the decision-making processes? So having UN being our real allies, because now we have, for example, in my country, we have a very huge militarization that I call in French surmilitarisation, like over-militarization. But what are the real impact of that surmilitarization? Is it saving us as it has been created for, or is it destroying us, as described in the song I shared, the elephant that are under the grass? So maybe it's not, for some of them, for some of the states that are involved in bringing people there, military there, they are among them goodwills, but how to influence how these goodwills act, how they intervene in our territory. So there also, with the first alliances made in the global movement, including in the academic level, find ways to influence and to impact the decision that made with the powerful people. So that is, I think, the two ways that we should really see ourselves. And we can't be in spaces if we don't have resources. So if I want, for example, to be at the decision-making processes, I should be empowered for that, but also included and given means, like means as space, but also having voice and having economic resources to be in that stage where decisions are made on my communities. So I'm thinking about the UN peace building processes. I'm thinking about the African region, for just the Africa region, and the Sahel G5 also meetings. So we should be there and find alliances in all these spaces. Thank you. I know that my other sisters want to share, so I will stop here.
Thank you, Mariam. Those were really important strategic observations. And I think you set a very broad map, which is very useful. So Tuku, over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I agree with our sister Mariam, what she says about getting more data on different issues, so we know how to move forward. But including that, I think there is also need for a full comprehensive implementation of UNTRIP, and also to make a report on how UNTRIP is used in praxis and self-determination. Because in my example, we heard that the Greenland government think like if we take more and more areas from Kingdom of Denmark, then our indigenous rights will be more and more irrelevant. So we need some examples how UNTRIP is being used in praxis. And also, I think with the alliances, this alliance that we have made, the Global Advisory Board that BINA have initiated, that is also very important thing that we can use. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I wonder whether Vera or Rana, you'd like to make a comment. We don't have a whole lot of time, but if you have thoughts you'd like to contribute on this, it would be really interesting to hear them about, just to build on the excellent comments that Mariam and Tuku already made.
Thanks. I can jump in if I may. I don't see where I can raise the hand, but alliance building is such a challenge because it's also very context specific. In the Sami case, there have been very strong alliances with environmentalists on many occasions. This year we celebrate well, I'm not sure if everybody wants to call it a celebration, but mark the conflict of the Alta River, where the government, like, also related to this resource and energy projects, energy development, where a major salmon river was about to be dammed, and there was a very strong alliance between environmentalists, sports fishers, and the Sami. And this was again a major threat to the Sami reindeer herding, like a key reindeer herding calving area that would have been submerged. So they established a very strong alliance. The development went ahead, but in a much smaller scale. So the village that was about to be submerged survived, and the calving areas as well. But it also marked kind of like it marked a watershed in not only in Norwegian but Scandinavian Sami policy in general, because of the very broad-based resistance, and so it prompted this closer governmental or state examination and consideration of Sami rights, and it led to the establishment of the Sami parliament in Norway. And in this case as well, like the most recent example, which is kind of related to, it's kind of as I say, it is a continuation of the hydro development, now the wind energy industry. There are coalitions with environmental groups and non-Sami groups that do see wind energy, wind power development as a continuation of colonization. On the other hand, there are occasions. I know the Inuit example where Greenpeace. We can't always assume that the environmentalists will be on our sides, and the seal hunt is a very good example of that, and which we always have to keep in mind. But in some cases, environmental organizations can be on our side, but not always. So we can't count on them, and we also have to be cautious how we proceed in building those alliances. With regard to Indigenous women's rights, we can look to feminist organizations, but there are also tensions there. There have been tensions there. This is something that I have looked into in my research, that there's this tendency that white women want to save Indigenous women from their communities. This kind of like a very similar tension and conflict that's kind of like in post-colonial feminism, or post-colonial feminist activists have been criticizing the mainstream feminist movement. But nevertheless, they have been very important alliances there as well. There was something I wanted to add, but now it slipped. I probably can go back to it in a moment. No, yes, I think that what I totally echo Tukumi Nuaka's words about establishing these kind of networks. I think the Indigenous solidarity, global Indigenous solidarity is very strong, and we see it in movements like the Standing Rock, how it really mobilized not only Indigenous people over the world who traveled to Standing Rock, but also locally. Like those that's what happened in Standing Rock really mobilized locally Indigenous communities. And now in the age of social media, obviously we know the disadvantages of social media, but also it is an avenue where we can get like real-time information about the events and the conflicts that are happening around the world in Indigenous communities. So that's very powerful, and perhaps the most important one that we need to strengthen further. Thanks.
Thank you, Anna. And thank you for highlighting these complexities, which is exactly, I think, what I had in mind in Northern Request. So I know we're out of time, but Vera, did you want to just add one or two comments briefly?
Yeah, thank you.
Because I think I'm sure you have views too. Yeah, and then I'll hand it over to the organizers. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak. And I think it's very important, and I very agree with Mariam that it's we have to collect the data. We have to collect the data, and I also agree with Tuku that this alliance of our global alliance is really powerful tool and mechanism kind of tool of network that I'm very pretty sure that it will help us to somehow reach our goals. I just wanted to add that when I was representative at the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, I just realized that there's a really big lack of real mechanism and tools how to influence decision making. And I think it's like our alliance has to find allies and maybe just develop some tools and mechanism to somehow influence the decision makers that they have to listen us. This is my really big kind of concern and point. That's it. I'm sorry, I cannot hear.
That's because I didn't unmute. You're right. Thank you so much. I think this was really a fantastic set of discussions. We could go on much longer, but probably everybody needs a little break before the second panel. So I think on everybody's behalf, I would really like to thank Bina for bringing this together. It's really extraordinarily powerful convening. And I echo, I think, I forget which one of you it was who said, let's all meet in person, when it is possible. I think that would be wonderful. I'm sure we at Harvard would love to facilitate that, or maybe with our colleagues at Columbia, but definitely let's have that as a goal for next year. And really look forward to seeing, I'm sure there will be very, very good kind of notes and proceedings from this. And maybe we can think of some publication or something, because I think the point several of you made about the importance also of just getting more information out, teaching our students, the next generation. I mean, we span many generations in this group even, but really using these powerful insights for a broader audience is something that I think we would be definitely committed to. So again, thank you so much. And I'm going to hand over to, I don't know if it's Bina or Raquel or who's going to formally close this session, and then invite people to take a brief break before the next panel. But thank you all so much.
So thank you everyone for your thought-provoking contributions, and we'll see everyone again at 11:30. Thank you so much.
Yat e, she Shelly lo yenisha, Bilagana nishle, Nanastasia Tachini Bashachi, Bilagana Dashache do Trabaja Dashanale, lo Cantiel de Nasha. Hello, my name is Shelly Lowe. I am Navajo, originally from Ganado, Arizona. I'm the executive director of the Harvard University Native American program, and I'm delighted to welcome us to the second session of today's event. Global Indigenous Women's Convening on Peace, Justice, and Reconciliation. Our early panel talked a lot about the challenges facing Indigenous women, the role of Indigenous women's, but in particular, the recognition of Indigenous status, Indigenous rights, and self-determination. We have asked our panelists to come together this afternoon, or wherever you are for this second session, to talk about Indigenous ways of looking at peace, justice, and reconciliation mechanisms. Our earlier session talked about the imposition of borders, the imposition of governments, the imposition of language and industry, both green industry and industrial extractive industries. And we want to think about what does it mean as Indigenous women to confront these challenges, but also to draw upon the strengths of Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous lifeways. I want to begin by introducing Lucy Mullen-Kay. She is the executive director of the Indigenous Information Network. Lucy is part of the Maasai tribe, and her expertise lies in the sustainable development of Kenya's Indigenous pastoralist communities. Lucy, welcome to the session.
Sorry, I had not unmuted myself. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation. And thank you for putting in together this very wonderful gathering. I think the first part I listened carefully. And by the end of the day, when we finished, I said, oh my, what am I going to talk about now? It's very interesting because most of the issues that are being discussed are actually impact on globally for Indigenous people. I come from the Maasai community, which is a pastoralist community, and a number of Indigenous peoples in Africa, where I'll be touching here and there about the pastoralist community, the nomadic pastoralists. Most of the Indigenous peoples are mostly nomadic pastoralists. Their main economy is livestock and trade. They move from one area to the other, mainly looking for pasture, water, and so on for their own livestock to make their life better. Even though most of the time these days life has slightly changed because some of them have settled in different areas depending on which country they are, because the countries have changed their laws, and so land has become also a very critical issue. And in looking at most of the things that we are going to discuss today is mainly about land, because Indigenous people, the main critical area where it brings conflict, critical area where they get challenges is issues of land. Because in most of their lands, just like their brothers and sisters from the hunter-gatherers communities, is that their land is where the most natural resources are. All the natural resources you may think of are found in those particular lands. But at the same time, the same lands are impacted by many other issues. Climate change is one of the biggest problems that has impacted on Indigenous people's communities' land. And also the degradation of that particular environment. Many people have degraded logging and so on, and charcoal burning and different other activities that you may think about. Of course, also with the large projects that are brought in by the government without the free pre-informed consent by Indigenous people. So when they move from this side, by the time they come back, their land is also taken away because of other projects, and the way the laws and the constitutions in many governments, the land, the resources belong to the government and not particularly to the people. And that also brings a lot of conflict for Indigenous people. Why am I bringing all this? Because this impacts on the community. What impacts in a very single community also impacts in the whole family. And that's why I'm bringing to show exactly what the kind of life that our communities lead and why most understand them. And I think looking at Indigenous people, and one of the greatest challenges that we always have and that escalates the conflict is that most governments, most people don't understand our traditional ways of life. They don't understand how we manage our own life, our own resources, our own conflict resolution, our own solving of problems, because most of the indigenous communities have their own way of solving these problems. They have their own way of sitting down. The elders, the council of elders, sit down and they solve different conflicts that are within the community. And this sometimes brings a lot of also challenges in terms of looking at the administration, at the government, and looking at those particular ways of solving the problems. It becomes something else which we really have to think about a lot. And one of the resources that brings a lot of conflict, especially in Africa, is the issue of resources like water and pasture. And I've mentioned about climate change and drought and so on. And these communities have a pattern of where to go. They have their own rules and laws, the customary laws on where to go and graze, where to get water, how to share those resources. But when those institutions, those particular institutions where they have to listen to the elders are broken, then the conflict starts, and it really can become very, very bad conflict at many times. And if you look at all over Africa, most of the areas where we have such conflicts, we have, for example, in countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and the northern part of the Sahel, as Mariam had already mentioned. And also in the central part of Africa, you see that west and central part, you also see countries like Cameroon and Nigeria. We have these communities who are also crossing borders all the way from Nigeria to Cameroon, and they also go trading all the way to Chad, to Niger, and there is that movement there. And this movement only is made by those indigenous peoples, and they have their own dynamics. And those dynamics, nobody actually understands them very well. They trade very well. That is West Africa. And also coming to the Eastern Africa, they have their own trade. We have their own different communities across different regions. Kenya, Uganda and Southern Sudan, and we also have Ethiopia and Kenya, and we have Tanzania and Kenya. And we have all this trade and different understanding among the communities. But unfortunately, in the past few years, despite discussing all this and saying how they have their own setup, their own customary laws and their own ways of solving those conflicts and how they discuss and talk among the elders, those institutions have been broken down. And because those institutions have been broken down, it has become also a big challenge in terms of bringing peace to the community. There is that complication in the communities cannot easily sit down and talk together and be able to do those reconciliation formats that they used to do before, because of the land has either been divided. There have been, some of the people have got titles. They say the land belongs to them. They cannot no longer go and have those particular discussion on knowing how they can be able to manage the land and also protect their own resources like water, where they have to water the animals, which are the economy. That becomes quite a big challenge for them. And most of the time in the Eastern African region, it brings a lot of problem. We have seen also in the other regions that I've mentioned, these can escalate and become quite very difficult. The only other biggest problem when it escalates is when the administration, the government comes in, because most of those communities do not, they like doing the things on their own. And when we talk about reconciliation, when we talk about peace, when we talk about justice, we need to look at how we can be able to have this reconciliation between not only the communities, but also seeing how the governments can try to understand the community, the customary laws, try to adapt them. We are now in a different digital world whereby such customary laws are not really taken as seriously as we'd like them to go back to. Even though there are structures that have already been put in place at the community level up to the administration level, but they are not as strong as they are supposed to be. So as we discuss about this, we also will look at it and see where are the women in all these conflicts? Where are the women when it comes to making peace? And how do we include them? Do we have space? Do we have a place we can be? And in the institutions that I have talked about that have broken in most of the countries, do the indigenous communities anymore have a voice? Do we have our governments in Africa who have already really accepted and even looking at the UN, the United Nations Declaration on Indigenous People? I will tell you there are very, very few, if any, it's only one or two that can be able to look at this particular UN DRIP and pick it up. And I mean, this continent called Africa, whereby also when you talk about human rights issues, it's something that you have to talk it very carefully and know how to handle it. Just like you are seeing it in many other countries in Asia, for example. Right now, we had a colleague from Philippines who is busy trying to see how they can bring reconciliation and how they can bring peace and unite the people in the areas of Philippines where there have been a lot of conflict among the communities and among the administration. So we need to look at such particular discussions and see where do we go and how do we start beginning. I think I like the way Miriam was saying that we need to look at resolutions. Some of the resolution we can pass and look at how this can be strongly accepted and how it can be strongly used in terms of looking at how we can make laws that can be really impact on our communities and that can be used, and also integrate it with what we already have. We have, for example, in the African region, we have the African Union, which has very, very good laws, and even in most countries on peace, justice and reconciliation. But tell me, have they been implemented? Have the indigenous communities, do they know these laws? Do they know these laws that are at level? That is where we have a problem. We need to really see how we can start creating awareness and how we can start helping our communities understand some of those instruments which are very crucial. It's also very important to say that we have to really see how we can strengthen these institutions for indigenous people. We have to work very closely with our elders, our people in the community, and let them bring back those institutions. For example, when we are working on issues of biological diversity, we have the biocultural protocols, where we believe if at all the communities can come together and put those customary laws and compare them with the national laws and the international laws in terms of the benefit sharing on their natural resources that they have in their own communities, it can help them to really strengthen up their customary ways of trying to look at how benefit sharing is done. That's almost the same way that we can be able to do in such things. I will give you also a very small example of how women can be able to really come up and really think about themselves, because they are the ones who are impacted a lot when there is conflict. Is the mother who looks down and see their sons being killed, and what can they do? What can they be able to help? They are the same mothers and young women that are always victims of rape and a lot of trafficking and name it, all those sad things that happen during conflicts. They are the ones who suffer. We know that traditionally also the women play a role in trying to make their sons, whom they love very much, traditionally, to encourage them to go and fight for their community. And they sing for them. They try to bring those words for them, poetry, and try to really encourage them, just like the lady, our senior lady we saw her here from the Tuareg community. So these things are there, and they are really able, if we can try to make sure that we can encourage the women to also play a role. We know they play a role in the private domain, but at least in the public, they are not seen because of the traditions and cultures that we have in the different traditional communities. In one of the areas where I work with the women, I have a very good example that I thought it was something that we could start doing with the women to see how we can. There was a conflict, and this conflict was intertribal, within the same tribe, the Maasai. And this conflict was about land. And it is a conflict that has never gone away since I was a small child. Since I was in school, we always see the young men being killed because anytime it could erupt and they could fight, and they are the same community. So recently, about last year, there was a conflict, and the houses of the women were burnt, and they lost everything. And the women, nobody really came up to see, what do we do with these women? What do we give shelter and so on? So when we met as women, we decided we have to start an urgent fund. We have to sit down and look at what conflict can do to us. How can we be able to take action ourselves? And we took examples from other women from other regions where they always have a system of the way they build on peace. Some of them do it in spots like Uganda and Kenya. There have been some indigenous women also who have been playing a very big role in terms of looking at how they organize these big activities that encourage the two communities to work together. And so we said, instead of leaving the women just to stay alone, let's have them have an urgent fund of their own. Let them contribute and feel this is the way they can be able to do something so that they can help each other. So that if any conflict comes and we don't want it to happen, they can be able to rescue themselves and even be able to meet and help each other. This is very important for the women to be already being involved and being able to know what they can do. There is one also thing that I really want to recommend very strongly. We are finding that we have the youth who are really being impacted. And if we have to build those institutions that we are saying, we need to put them in place, and we need to start taking our communities through this reconciliation, we must involve the youth. The youth have become victims because when they finish school, they're in the community. Remember, we are this time where we have the COVID-19 and they are locked down. The movements are limited for many, and we are losing quite a number of youth when they try to go save their own communities. And we really need to make sure that we involve them. I think earlier on, even discussion with Tarsila, she was talking of how it's important for the universities to be involved. But what about those who don't get to the university? How do we collect all these ideas together and see how we can be able to kind of connect each other? For example, in the different indigenous women organizations like FIMI, we have a global school. Why don't we have a global school on peace and reconciliation? And we make sure that we involve and we really train those young people, and they start learning, and they can be able to come up with a way that they can be able to really help our communities and our future, because they are the future leaders. They're the ones taking from the elder people. So I think those are some of the key recommendations that I want to bring up. And definitely the issue of building institutions strongly, and also trying to involve as much as possible the other agendas and the other young people is very important that we take up. I think I'll stop there, because quite really discussing this, we can discuss and discuss, and it's a very interesting topic. And I really pray and thank that we are all doing this. Bina, thank you very much. And we hope we can continue this in the rest of the year. We see where we end up to. Thank you.
Oh, Lucy, thank you. Such powerful words. Thank you for bringing us back to notions of the land, movement on the land, traditional connections across the land. Thank you for also talking and introducing us to connections across different communities and how we might think about conflict resolution and how other communities do it, how they do it within their own traditional ways. But also thank you so much for bringing us back to multiple generations, the importance of our elders and the work that we are doing, and the importance of the youth who are going to be following us and taking on this work once we have kind of moved on and it's their turn. You've brought up such great notions that we need to really continue to think about. I now want to turn to Wageragatste. Louise Hearn is the Bear Clan mother for the Mohawk Nation Council, founding member of Gonongwe Council, a circle of Mohawk women. She pulls the threads of ancient matrilineal knowledge from Sky Woman's origins to the present. Welcome. I'm glad you are here, and we're looking forward to hearing your words.
Gwe sego gwe got gwana holado tanaya skana daidawan he's a lohedste. Greetings to everyone, and I'm quite honored to be within the company of so many brilliant and passionate women, and a big nyalkoa to the organizers, the women that pulled this together. And thank you for the land acknowledgements and prayers of condolence for our sister who has suffered loss today. So my name is Wat Gilligatste. I'm a Yagoyana, a clan mother of the Ganyetgahaga Nation. I've been condoled in the hereditary position of being a clan mother for the last going on 16 years. My mother was a clan mother and my grandmother was a clan mother. So the society that we live in is called a matriline, and we are of a matrilineage. So it's a mother maternal rule, a mother-based society. And I have a PowerPoint if the technician can pull up my PowerPoint. But anyway, so today I'm coming to you from the traditional territory of Akwesasne. We call ourselves the Ganyet-Gahaga people. We're the Eastern doorkeepers to the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. And we're based on the Mohawks of Akwesasne is connected by rivers and divided by international and provincial borders. It sits at the confluence of 3 rivers, the Racket River, the St. Regis, and the mighty St. Lawrence River, which serves as highways, trade routes, and reliable sources for fishing. Akwesasne also sits at the intersection of 3 settler colonial jurisdictions, the provinces of Ontario, Quebec, and the state of New York, giving rise to jurisdictional nightmares, and it complicates where our people live. We are a highly policed community because our reservation straddles that international boundary line where we live. The health of the rivers and their ability to provide healthy food has been degraded and diminished by heavy industry like Alcoa, General Motors, aluminum plants, hydroelectric development, and the construction of the St. Lawrence Seaway. These developments continue over the years to have adverse effects on our environment. It restricts our ability to engage in fishing and other things like our harvesting activities, our planting, our cultivation. Heavy industry has large, even though a midwife here managed to do a study on the environmental impacts, and we officially kind of want to get them out of here. It's the long-lasting effects that we're still feeling, and the legacy of those plants, those industrial plants, is still seen in the local wildlife and the contaminated riverbed, with enduring health consequences for Akwesasne and the surrounding communities. Cancer is a really big aftermath, and also affecting the fertility of our young men and also our young women. The more progressive that we could become in Akwesasne, for the sake of convenience, the sicker that we become. So even though we won like a settlement for these super plants, we continue to fight for the environmental cleanup and the leadership role in environmental management. But we continue to get complicated by the multi-jurisdictional nightmare that we always find ourselves in, and how heavily watched we are by the government, because they fear that if we united, that we could regain our lands and our right to control it. Our sister community in Six Nations, which is about a 6-hour drive west of us, is battling Nestle's. They're siphoning off from the outside of their reservation, their aquifer, and they're bottling the water in plastic bottles and then reselling it to the natives there. So it took a Dr. Dawn Martin to discover this and the science that she knows. She's an anthropologist, and the community's been up in uproar because it affects their safe drinking water. So we're heavily affected by, like even our rivers here in Akwesasne, it's so contaminated with PCBs that we are warned not to eat the fish from the river or to drink the water. And even though the cleanup is happening, they're cleaning up outside of the reservation, but and the tributaries that of rivers that come to the reservation, but there's very little action in terms of cleaning up right on the reserve that's been affected by big industry. And so in Canada too, which also the country that used our language to name itself, has come up with this Truth and Reconciliation for Indigenous people, for having, taken our lands and taken our children into residential schools. It's been a difficult thing, and all they offer us is basically fiscal compensation in order to heal ourselves. But the wounds of colonization are so deep, and we do live in traumatized communities where we've been disempowered to help ourselves. So for me, one of the things as a clan mother that I look at, because I'm responsible for the maternal and child wellness of our communities, in order to go forward, I had to go backward. And if you can go back to the first slide there, in a matriline maternal society, it's the women who are the law. And it's the women who choose the leaders, and it is the women that have the right to call for war, to call for peace. With the right of nomination and the right of recall, women are the authorities. And we, in order to understand that fully, we have to go back to the beginning of our own creation story. And if you can go back to the next slide. Thank you. So this is the roots of democracy, which the United States of America have founded their own democratic principles on. So, and history is an imposter. He's a false man among us. And history is written by those who are telling the story, and it's vested in the self-appointed victor. But our ancestors were very present in the founding of the United States of America and its Constitution. The framework of who we are is founded in a sisterhood, told to us in stories through certain epochs since our original creation story. So the women are the foundation. The walls and the roof are the brotherhood or our chiefs. And the leadership can only be risen within the men through the uterine voice of the woman or the mother that says it to be so. So here's an artist depicting how women crown our leaders with the emblem of our authority vested in the deer antler, who's our lead animal where we live. And so he cannot have a voice unless a woman gives it to him. Next slide. So, and in our story through the epochs in time, there's, and I could talk a lot about the men's story, but I think what's really important today is to unveil, perhaps maybe for the first time to the world, is the woman's story. It's like we know a lot about Jesus and we know a lot about God, but we don't know a lot about who their mother is. And so in our stories, everybody knows the peacemaker, everybody knows Hiawatha, but nobody knows about Jagusase, who is our peace mother. And she has the office of the great peace woman. She's the head clan mother of all the nations. She wears a cape covered with freshwater pearls, and these pearls would become a representative of purity and peace. This cape becomes a symbol of her office and position as the head of all clan mothers of the Confederacy. Women of renowned wisdom would follow in her footsteps at the House of Peace, eventually established at Ganadagan in central New York. She's of the Wolf Clan and the Wyandot and Seneca Nation. The last to hold this honored office was Caroline Parker, but since colonization happened, she has been erased from history. And so today, resurrecting her memory and her office. And as the nations are dispersed across Turtle Island, there is no one woman chosen from the people as the great peace woman. And today her office stands empty. But she was appointed by our peacemaker to be the law of the land. Next slide. So Jagusase, she just doesn't become the peace queen because she hasn't suffered something. And all of us women become mothers because we feel the pain of childbirth. And as so Jaguseze in childbirth gave birth to a son who had abnormalities, who had grave disfigurement in his bones, in his structure. And because she knew that her son would suffer ridicule and bullying, she abandoned her child on an island all by himself when he was probably about the age of 6 or 7. And because she had to contend with her guilt and her self-hate of having to do such a tremendous act, she went toward the promotion of war. And in order to move away from this karmic debt of guilt, she started to spin the wheel of karma, and she started to promote war and the warriors. And so we lived many hundreds of years of fighting each other and bloodletting. And she was at the center of the promotion of war because she was feeding the warriors. And she was the head corn mother who controlled the supply of food. However, when the peacemaker arrived, she was the first to recognize the importance of his message of peace. And she was also the first to recognize that she had to lobby for women's position in this new peace covenant. Next slide. So years go on, and the message of the peacemakers carried throughout our territory. And then comes the day, and of course the peacemaker takes Chiguseze alone on these missions of delivering this peace message. But comes the day when she has to confront her greatest guilt, her worst decision she ever made in her life was to confront her son, Taradaho. And because of the years of abandonment and loneliness, he became a great sorcerer. And they say that he was so wicked and so evil, he had snakes in his hair, and that he murdered the daughters of Hiawatha, and that he was very gruesome to look at, and he had tremendous power over the winds, over the lands, over the rains. And, you know, he was just feared by all the people in the land. And they had to approach him, and he was totally unapproachable because he was so gruesome looking. But what happened was that when they first tried to approach him, he created waves and tide and drowned all the approaching warriors that would come to his island. But then Hiawatha and the peacemaker recognized they could not approach him without the mother, without the woman in the canoe to cross the river. And then she lent him, the peacemaker, her song, which was a lullaby. And he sang this lullaby to Taradaho that soothed him and created the memory that triggered the memory of his mother's love. And so came the time when they were able to approach him, and they brought him the message of the great peace. And it was her that had the ability to comb the snakes from his hair. And the men realigned his body and performed basically a great miracle in reshaping not only his body, but also his thinking. And then upon that, the peacemaker, through this great transformation, appointed him the central figure to the Confederacy, which is kind of like the president of the United States. So this was a great appointment, but he didn't arrive there because he was born perfect. He arrived there because he suffered something. And the mother also came to this point because she suffered something. And all of us mothers who know when we bring a child into the world, the big responsibility of that is, and how painful it is when our children are hurting, and how desperate we become in order to alleviate that pain. Next slide. So as we move through time, and I know I don't have a lot of time here, is that the Haudenosaunee women in their maternal order, when the first wave of saltwater people, the Europeans, got here, and in mid-18th century, when European patriarchal law subdued the woman, the mother, as a possession of the man, they came here and seen my Haudenosaunee grandmothers having absolute freedom, autonomy, and sovereignty, political right, political voice, the right over her own children, and the right to decide about the land and about war and about peace. So we influenced those early suffragettes. And so in order to bring visibility to that great story, they're gonna erect in what white women call the birthplace of feminism in Seneca Falls in central New York, these statues, and it's going to be called the Ripples of Change. But the white woman, the Black woman are standing there together, but the Haudenosaunee woman is holding a wampum belt that is emblematic of the peace that was established between our European brothers and between our Haudenosaunee nations and the indigenous people of these lands. And within, it's the only treaty that ever included nature, the environment. And it says, as long as the grass grows, the river flows, and the sun shines, so we shall navigate the rivers of life side by side, and one will not overpower the other. And that treaty is as good today as the day it was agreed to. So slowly, the story of the woman and the mother, and this is Laura Kellogg Cornelius, who went to Geneva back in the early 1900s to fight for the atrocities that was happening to our people here. And she went with one of our Oneida chiefs, the Skahe, who greatly influenced the League of Nations. And there's a statue there in Geneva of him now, and he is studied. But the woman, again, got left out of the history. Next slide. So in the European view of looking at indigenous societies here on the hemisphere of North and South America, Matilda Jocelyn Gage, in her writings and with her dealings with my grandmas, seeing her European eyes, seen for the first time a society. And she coined this phrase that said, never was justice more perfect, and never was civilization higher, because everybody had abundance and everybody had prosperity and everybody had peace of mind. And it starts from this woman who is our sky woman, who fell from a celestial opening in the sky world and came here and created Turtle Island. And so everything in our ceremonial life, in the naming of our babies, everything that we do in our puberty rites, in how we plant, and how we dance, to how we collect medicine, reflects back to this mother, to this woman called Ojit Jizo, our sacred sky woman. Next. And so again, you know, we're dealing with colonists, conquerors, who bring laws of conquest founded in manifest destiny from the kings and queens of Europe. And so in order for the kings and queens of Europe at the time of Columbus had to understand what land this was, their artists drew this rendition, which cannot be found on the internet, but is hidden in the basement of the Library of Congress in a temperature controlled room, and you can only hold this with white gloves, is a rendition of an artist who painted what America looks like. And he painted it in the image of an indigenous woman who was autonomous, who was in charge of the land, and who was responsible to her people. She had a bow, she had an arrow, she had a feathered headdress and a feathered skirt, and even the wild beasts understood her authority over the land. So this is the law of the land and the lady of the land. So for me, in Haudenosaunee philosophy and worldview, women are the law. Next. And then henceforward, again, in a time in history, once, you know, the United States becomes the superpower of the world, vested in a constitution that only promotes white land-only men, that left out the women, that left out people of color, that just left everybody out but themselves. They took an idea of what America is, and they created this statue intertwined with a Greek goddess, and they put her at the top of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., but no one knows she's there. They had to put clothes on her, and they had to civilize her, and she is now called the Lady of Freedom. But she does stand at the top of the Capitol building overlooking her dominion. And so it's ironic that, you know, when the insurrection happened January 6th, that, you know, the people who think they founded democracy was really beating each other up. And, you know, as an Indigenous woman, I sat back and looked at, you know, they created something that they can't control now. And because they have no mother, because they didn't include a mother in their democracy, there's nobody to correct them. Next slide. So, you know, peace is an intricate weave woven by the hands that choose it. And because the Haudenosaunee people understood what war was, and understood what grief was, and understood what loss was, we adhered to the message of our peacemaker. And we do weave this intricate web of profound and long-lasting peace, even though the governments of Canada, the United States have done incredible measures to kill the Indian, but keep the man, and to annihilate us. So now in this present day, I mentor our own young women in their 20s and 30s to resurrect this kind of matrilineage. And it's truly amazing that this kind of history still exists, because the government works so hard to hide it and to erase it from the memories of the people and from the memory of the land. So, you know, we have in the United States 14 schools of war that teaches our young people how to fight, but not a single school of peace. And in moving forward, I'm trying to move forward the idea of a school of peace founded in the primordial principles and protocols to peace based in a peace mother. Next slide. Or that's the last slide. Yeah, that's the last slide. So ladies, you know, I'm a fill-in for Elvira here. And I am a clan mother within my nation. I am responsible for the intricate movings of our of many things in terms of education and in terms of you know, the economy and the environment. And I'm really privileged to be in the company of you ladies. But you know, as we move forward, and who do we align ourselves with? I think we need to create a mother's military. And you know, I understand we can't take our rights for granted, and we need to align ourselves with the Earth Mother. And as women, we have that cycling power, and that's what makes us so scary to men. And that's why for hundreds of years, thousands of years, they have tried to suppress the woman's voice, the mother's voice. So I call for a great convening upon our sacred lands and our sacred territories. Women who still understand the earth, we need to call for her pity, because we're in a lot of trouble. And it's going to be through prayer. When the science can no longer move us, we have no choice but to move to spirituality and to use the power within who we are as women to use that authority without asking for permission. And we have to be able to tell governments that they have to, back off. And I think there's power in numbers. And I think if we call our old ancient mothers from the past to join us, and we arrive in their essence, if we arrive as our sacred sky woman, as our white buffalo calf woman, as the Maoris, as their sea maiden, as the queen of Hawaii, all those ancestral women are deities. As we arrive in their essence, that gives us the authority to exert mother law over Indigenous peoples' lands. So from here in Akuzasne, I really want to say Nyankoa for all your wisdom, your brilliance, your concerns, your words. And I have a lot of hope, but no one woman can do it. And I think we can't ignore the fact of that intuitive power that lies within our wombs and within our hearts. And I think kindness for each other and celebration of each other is what's going to propel us into the solutions and the remedies that we need to face down our oppressors. So Nyankoa, thank you.
Well, Gergapte, thank you so much for sharing all of the information and the images that you've given to us today. I want to especially thank you for bringing us back to the importance of creation stories, our stories that really inform Indigenous lifeways, Indigenous knowledge, and our stories that give us the ways to deal with conflict and war, the ways to bring balance and essentially peace back to our lifeways and our relationships with other communities through things like treaties that you've talked about. I also appreciate the images you gave of America as a woman. The Harvard Art Museum has a sculpture, and it's called America, and it's a woman's head. And I always think about that because our stories of America completely erase the role of women. But you've brought us back to that, and I just thank you very much for that. I now want to introduce Claire Charters, Nadi Fakau Tu Faretoa Napui Tainui. She's an associate professor at the University of Auckland, Faculty of Law, specializing in Indigenous peoples' international and constitutional rights, often with a comparative focus. Claire, I know it is very early where you are, so good morning and thank you so much for joining us.
O kia ora koutou. Ko nongataha te maunga, ko Utahina te awa, ko te aroa te waka, ko Ngāti Whakaue, tainui tuwhare toa, me ngā puhi o ku iwi. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. So greetings to you all, and thank you so much for the invitation to contribute to this discussion this morning, my time. I think it might be your midday-ish, at least there on the eastern seaboard. It's a great pleasure to be here, and it's certainly a great honour to be amongst you. Some of you I know quite well, and it would be fantastic to see you again in person. Many of you I know of, and your fantastic work. So it's fantastic to be here, and thank you so much for the invitation. As you mentioned, it is rather early this morning, and I'm hardly a morning person. In fact, my father did laugh somewhat when he understood that I had to get up before 4 a.m. in the morning. He thought that was pretty funny, knowing me quite well. So I have also done a slide, but I've only got 2 slides. There's basically a cover slide and also then just one other slide. So we'll just move to in the minute. But what I did want to talk about, and just briefly, because there's a lot more to be said and there is a lot written on this topic, is what's called a tribunal review of the Mana Wahine Māori claim. Mana Wahine refers to the authority, the prestige, the status, I guess, of women of Māori women. And this claim is before the Waitangi Tribunal, which is a tribunal established to hear Crown breaches or state breaches, if you like, against the Treaty of Waitangi in Aotearoa, New Zealand. It's the basis of a comprehensive claim, as they might call it. It will take many years for evidence to be brought forward and for Māori women's claims to be heard with respect to the Crown. Obviously, it will be a wide-ranging claim. It will cover centuries of activity, and it will probably also raise issues within tikanga Māori or within the Māori world or te ao Māori, and not just as against the state. And I wanted to focus on it because it's obviously a very important claim, and it's a very big event, and it's something in process, I guess, that about Māori women's experiences of colonisation and contemporary forms of colonisation as well. But at heart, the goal, I think, or the objective of the Waitangi Tribunal, which is a state-established institution, but at heart it is about reconciliation. A cynical perspective might see it as sort of trying to appease the white people, if you like, as trying to provide these processes so that Pākehā New Zealand or non-Māori New Zealand can feel that it has done something about the Māori issue, if you like. But I think that its role, the role of the Waitangi Tribunal, is actually deeper and more profound than that. And evidence of that is seen in the way that Māori women have come forward, and indeed Māori generally come forward and participate in the Waitangi Tribunal. But it is really about justice, peace and reconciliation for Māori women, rather than necessarily the role that Māori women can play in justice, peace and reconciliation. So I've taken a slightly different tack, I guess, on this. So I guess we can move to the next slide, and this is just some of the information that I'll go through and some of the points that I want to get across. But there's a picture there of Pania Newton, and she is a former student of mine, and she has also led recently as a young Māori woman I guess the most recent what you might call land protest in Aotearoa, New Zealand, which is, there has been some reconciliation of that, or I guess resolution to that protest, with what will be the return of that land to her peoples, to Pānia's people. And I wanted to put that up as a sort of contemporary, I guess, picture of that illustrates. I think you can see there her leadership is in her eyes. But it also highlights, I guess, that Māori women in their youth are very active in leading the Māori movement as well, despite some of the impacts of colonisation that I'll talk about. But just to start, not wanting to idealise or essentialise the role of Māori women in Māori society, the relationship between Māori men and Māori women under tikanga Māori pre-colonisation was a lot more equal than what we probably understand that relationship today. So just some examples about that, drawing on Mama Bear's reference to creation stories. The creation story for Māori, and I suspect it's very similar across Polynesian societies too, is very much about the coming together of Papatunuku, Earth Mother, and Sky Father, Ranginui. And it is very much a story that symbolises the equality between men and women. Women are obviously revered again for our childbirthing ability, but also as the holders of whakapapa, as the holders of the genealogy, and genealogy is incredibly important in Māori society, remains so today. And is reflected also that a person's mana or status or prestige or I guess role in society is determined less by gender or sex, but more by genealogy of where you and how you fit in to society, and where you're born and who you're born to. and women and men can be of equal status, at least historically, but to some extent I think that's still true today. My own personal experience is that Māori, working in Te Ao Māori, there's a lot more equality than there is outside of Māori places and spaces. Harms against women were a harm against the tribe, the collective, and required the collective to address. There was no stigma around remarrying for women, for example, and I say that probably more to contrast where Māori society was at the time of contact with the English around the early 1800s or late 1700s, early 1800s, when at that time when under British law, for example, women were very much the chattel of the male. So there's a distinction for that. The woman, the word for in Te Reo Māori in the Māori language for he or she is the same. So there's no distinction there. Just because we're talking about justice, peace and reconciliation, I think Māori women definitely had a role to play in justice, peace and reconciliation, and probably in a special role. And there are some stories and mythology that we have around that. But Māori women were also understood to be fighters as well. And so something that is often seen and is quite seen internationally is the haka, is the war dance. And you often see that performed by men today, but and particularly in the international arena. But women participate in war dance and also participated in warfare historically as much as men, even though we also have a special role in terms of peace and methods to achieve peace. A common method to achieve peace was through intermarriage between tribes as well, and that was often led and driven by women as well. So that's just it's as I said, we have to be careful not to idealize Māori society pre-colonization, but certainly compared to English society at the time that Aotearoa New Zealand was colonized, was relatively, there was equality there, and certainly under tikanga Māori, it was more about your whakapapa, who you're born to, rather than gender or sex or so on. So at the time of colonization, the impact of colonization was obviously profound and genocidal in many ways. And the impact on women was particular and specific. And that was seen from the very get-go, when English would only deal and treat with chiefs, with male chiefs, rather than with female chiefs. And you can see that in the claim coming before the Waitangi Tribunal today. While New Zealand is the first country in the world to grant Māori women the vote, women the vote, Māori women didn't receive the vote at the same time as Māori men, which was also later. So there were schools for Māori women, for Māori girls, which had the explicit purpose of domesticating and teaching Māori girls domestic skills, so that Māori girls could be domesticated. And some of these schools were still in existence relatively recently. The impact of urbanisation post-war years on Māori society and tikanga Māori has been great and negative in the main, and particularly for women who again have been domesticated. There have also been very profound changes to tikanga Māori, to our own laws, and so as a result, I think, or with the influence of colonisation, Māori understandings of the relationship between men and women has become imbalanced. And you see that in modern manifestations of Māori governance, and contrary to tikanga and contrary to our traditions, Māori women have been relegated in some cases to lesser governance roles. That is definitely changing, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, and when coming up to today, actually. So today, I guess, for those who don't know, New Zealand is a very developed liberal democracy, and it is renowned to some extent for the leadership roles that are played by women in society as a whole. I think our current Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, has a relatively young Pākehā woman has some international repute, and we have had a number of women prime ministers. At one stage, all our highest offices from the state government were held by women, and so on. So there is this understanding of Aotearoa, at least from an external perspective, as I guess reflecting a lot of equality in society. But I don't think that's especially true, or certainly much more complicated when you come to Te Ao Māori. I think it is sugar-coated anyway, but it's much the picture looks quite different when you look at Māori women. So Māori women remain at the bottom of pretty much every socio-economic indicia that there is, including in education, health, for example. But one of the worst is with respect to incarceration. So Māori make up approximately 15-16% of the population in Aotearoa, New Zealand, but 60% of the prison population, so 60%. So what I find actually personally even sort of harder about that statistic is that has happened really in the last couple of decades. So this is not a historical phenomenon, which it is to a large extent with respect to Māori men, but with Māori women, the percentage has increased dramatically in the last couple of decades. And I find that, makes me very sad, makes me feel very sad. And this is something that is unknown about New Zealand too. We have one of, not quite as high as the US, but one of the highest incarceration rates in the world as well. Domestic violence, New Zealand has some of the worst statistics, certainly in I guess in the Western world with respect to domestic violence, and Māori women experience domestic violence at the greater rate of any other woman in the country. We have a huge problem with uplifting of Māori kids from Māori families. There's a lot of focus on that at the moment because of some relatively horrific cases that have been in the press, but experience of mothers of losing their children has been quite great, as well as the Māori women's experience or children's experience of state care. We currently have a commission looking into state care, and again, like all these other statistics, the number of Māori that have been subject to state care and abuse in state care is very high. But there are, focusing on today, there are lots of cases of hope, and that's why I think also I've have this picture of Pānia up here, because Māori women are claiming leadership and exerting ourselves. And you see this also through the Manawahine claim as well to the Waitangi Tribunal. The very fact that there will be a couple of years focused in the Waitangi Tribunal on the Manawahine claim. Women have also from the 70s through the Māori Renaissance, so-called Māori Renaissance through the 70s, led much protest and also efforts to achieve justice and reconciliation between Māori and non-Māori generally. Also, and I say this with some pride, although I've sometimes come up against the state in various pieces of my work, but our Minister of Māori Affairs, Nanaia Mahuta, is our first Māori woman Minister of Foreign Affairs, so our lead, and she is taking and will take, I think, a very sort of Indigenous approach to New Zealand's now policy on foreign affairs, and I'm looking forward to that. So turning to the claim, and I think with that history, it might be known to some of you already, but that history really sets the background to the Waitangi Tribunal claim. So a little bit about the Waitangi Tribunal. This is known as a bit of a truth and reconciliation commission, and it functions a little bit like that in a way, and has been compared to truth and reconciliation commissions, but it is really there to hear historical and contemporary breaches against the Treaty of Waitangi, which is understood really to be crown breaches of good behaviour. I guess it's not confined to law. It also includes what you might think of as sort of moral claims to wrong. And that is important because New Zealand's law is quite restrictive. It doesn't allow for claims, New Zealand state law at least, doesn't allow for Māori claims to justice. It makes recommendations to the executive government, and its recommendations in the main are non-binding. That is problematic because it means what it comes up with depends, and what happens in response to what it comes up with depends in large part on the political climate and whether you can get political buy-in, which also then I think tempers the way that the Waitangi Tribunal approaches its work as well. But it does recommend redress, and certainly its value comes as much as providing a space and place where these grievances and these issues can be heard. And the reports are interesting. They're often extremely long, take many years, but are pretty amazing. Just as a sort of reflection of where we're speaking in some of the people also who I've worked with in the past in this arena today, is that the tribunal does also use the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in support of its framework against which it assesses Crown action or state action. So the Mana Wahine claim, this comes out of the work of women since the start of the establishment of the Waitangi Tribunal, and indeed draws on the history of Māori women historically dating back before the signing of the Treaty of Waitangi as well. But some of the issues that have come up before, and it's just started on the 5th of February, had its first hearings, but just started, but it raises, for example, that Māori women were excluded from signing the Treaty of Waitangi, which is understood to be as our sort of founding constitutional document. It's much controversy over what the Treaty of Waitangi means and what it in fact did. But certainly there is lots of evidence to suggest that English male did not include Māori women chiefs, of which there were many in signing that. The removal of women from land ownership registers once Māori land was registered through state-based systems. The imposition of general claims to the imposition of colonial patriarchal system, which relates also to our constitutional structure, prejudice in the education system. I mentioned earlier the domestication of Māori girls through schooling, the impact of domestic violence, the impact of land confiscation on Māori. I'm actually out of where I normally live, because it's our weekend here also in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and I'm in an area where currently where there was tremendous land confiscation, but the impact of that on Māori women, particularly the lack of appointment of Māori women to government posts, the experience of Māori women in housing or exclusion from housing, urbanisation, the exclusion of women in resource management decisions, both at a state level, but also internally in Māori governance, and so on. It's a massive claim, and it brings together issues that have come up before the Waitangi Tribunal since its inception in 1975, and across all sorts of other claims. So it sees, I guess, Māori women's issues going across so many different other claims and issues that Māori face more generally. As mentioned, the claim has just started, and it will be a process that goes on for at least, I would say, for the next year and a half. And so really, as mentioned at the start, I highlight it as at least a process that is designed to try and achieve some reconciliation for Indigenous women, and some justice for Indigenous women, rather than really focusing on the role of Māori women in peace, justice and reconciliation, of which there has been significant participation and in fact role of Māori women in peace, justice and reconciliation. But this is slightly different because it's the attempt, at least, is to achieve some reconciliation. And the Waitangi Tribunal was made up also in in this case, some of the members are Māori women also, so that's interesting in of itself. Will it achieve justice for Māori women? Will it achieve reconciliation? Will it achieve indeed peace, I think, for Māori women. I'm not sure, but I think that the fact that there's an attempt made and Māori women are participating in it and see hope in it is hope for us all. So kia ora koutou, thank you again for having me along, and I very much have enjoyed the parts that I've heard this morning. I'm sorry I'm so late to coming along, and I look forward to questions and comments and to hearing more from you. Thank you very much indeed. Kia ora.
Claire, yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate how you've brought us into kind of reframing our conversation today to not just talk about peace, justice, reconciliation for Indigenous communities, but really peace, justice, reconciliation for Indigenous women. And how do we bring healing to our Indigenous women as a way to bring healing and maybe power back to our Indigenous communities. So this is a great way for us to think about the work that we have to move forward, but also to be realistic about truth and reconciliation and being honest and understanding what has happened in our traditional societies, in particular, what has happened to our women, where we are now, and what those really difficult aspects that we need to put front and center to heal our women in order to heal our communities. So thank you very much. And thank you for joining us so early in the morning, and tell your father you did a really great job. I'm now going to turn us back to Binna. Binna Lakshmi Napram is an Indigenous scholar and human rights defender whose work focuses on deepening democracy and championing women-led peace, security, and disarmament in Manipur, Northeast India, and South Asia. And I just want to say, Binna, thank you so much for pulling these amazing women together and giving us a platform to have these conversations. I know that this is very, very important to you, and you have really kind of shined a light here for us today. And I know that we're going to keep moving this forward. So thank you, Binna, and I'll turn it over to you.
Yes. Thank you very much. And I'm just looking at the time because we have to close at 1. So I may have to forego my own presentation in the interest of time, but I do want, because most of us are here from like 3 hours ago, so to take a deep breath, and just have a minute silence to remember the 400 people killed in Myanmar in the past pro-democracy protest by the military. The Asian people of Asian origin, the elderly who have been killed, attacked in the past few weeks, months, days. Thank you. And to remember our one of our global advisory board members, Jaseng Hakon Maran from the Kachin state, which is undergoing an aerial bombing by the Burmese military right now, and who could not join us today. We would have loved to hear her voice, so we remember her in our gathering too. With this, what I'll do is, we have very few minutes. I will just introduce you my home state, Manipur, because many of you have not known. So I will just introduce and just cull out in about 2-3 minutes the unique ways in which the Indigenous women of Manipur fought back against militarization, colonization, and the rampant violence which has been going on in the last couple of years back home. So I'll just take you through, Larissa, do you have my slides?
Yes.
Okay, can you please? So I'll just bring some images. So this is a market in Manipur. In Manipur, we have a very unique women's market. This is more than 500, 600-year-old market. Manipur, where I come from, is an ancient indigenous Asiatic state. And next, so this is so I hope when you visit us one day, you will So Asia, and we know we have more than 400 million indigenous people, and 2/3 of them are in Asia, where I come from. So there is a lot of indigenous communities there. You have met some at the UN Permanent Forum and others, but you know, there are billion others that you have. And one of our work is to see how we can bring those other voices to which you have not met. Next, very quickly, yeah. Yeah, and so armed conflict is what is armed conflict, 25 battle deaths a year. But in Manipur, where I come from, there are more than 50,000 killed. And yet, like what Veera said, India does not recognize the presence of indigenous people. India does not, just like China and Russia doesn't. So China, India, Russia does not recognize existence of indigenous people. What they have done is using colonial terms like scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, and then try to divide and rule amongst many indigenous population. This is what's happening right now. This is an image from my home state, Manipuri women wearing funeral attire to protest against a martial law. If you think India is a land of yoga, land of Gandhi, land of democracy, the place that I come from has a martial law. I repeat, a martial law since 1958. So the mothers and women of Manipur took out this protest. Next. I'll be very quick. Next. So just, I'm just talking about where I come from. Yeah, you see Myanmar. I was born just 2 hours away from the Myanmar border, and it's a colonial border state. So we have more than many Manipuris in Myanmar also, many Nagas in Myanmar. So many interethnic. So this is red portion that's called the northeast of India, home to 45 million people, indigenous people. But if you come to India with an Indian visa, you are not allowed in many of our territories. And so this is how the history of indigenous people in northeast of India has been blanked out from the history of the world's largest democracy for more than 62 years. That's why you would have never hardly hear a group of Nagas comes, a group of people come, but like except 1 or 2 dominant indigenous groups, you will not hear about 270 others whose voices are yet to reach the UN Permanent Forum, and our attempt to see that how we can get this together. Next. As I mentioned, the place where I come from has more than 300,000 troops. This red portion is the northeast of India. This is home to 300,000 troops and more than 72 armed insurgent groups. This is home to South Asia's longest running conflict, but this is buried in a thing called the world's forgotten crisis. And as I mentioned, martial law has been imposed here since 1958. The only 2 parts of India where martial law is imposed is my region and Kashmir. And it was imposed in my region in 1958 and in Kashmir in 1990. Such is the level of the racism in Indian policy towards the indigenous people that they think the only way they could control is through military and militarization. So I was born in such a war zone, and that's the work that we do. Next. Just to give an idea how beautiful our indigenous territories are, there is this next. So this is Mizoram bordering Myanmar, Bangladesh. Next. Yeah, Sikkim joined India in 1975, rather taken over, which borders China and Tibet. Yeah, next. That's where I come from. Next. Yeah. Just to let you see the kind of people which is in these areas. Whenever we as indigenous people come to New Delhi, people always ask us, Madam, which country are you from? The term they give us is Chinkies, means people with Chinese features. So during COVID-19, so many indigenous people who lived and worked in Indian metropolitan cities were asked to go back to China. They were spat at and prevented from entering grocery stores. Next. It's just to show you that these are also faces of India, yet India hasn't recognized us, just to let you know. Next. These are people from Sikkim. So it's an extraordinary community there. But again, this history of indigenous people is blanked out from the history of India. And that's a struggle. Next. Okay, next. So I will just, again, looking at the time, as I mentioned, next. So just go through, I will keep going, Larissa, and I'll, yeah. Yeah, keep going, and yeah. Oh, okay, yeah, next. Yeah, next, yeah. So yeah, just stop here again. So there has been many humanitarian crises in this, where more than 300,000 IDPs have been displaced. People talk about the Rohingya crisis, but what's happening in northeast of India is not spoken about at all to the world. Next, yeah. Yeah, next. So, and again, just to say, so many extrajudicial and fake encounters by armed personnel happening in this part of the world. Next. And I will end with next, rape as a weapon of war. Okay, here is, I would like to stop here. So the image that is a part of today's convening is taken out from this image. It's this women that I know, extraordinary. There are women in their 80s who are holding bamboo torches, and they patrol the streets of Manipur at night, because it's only in the night that military come and pick the young boy or the girl from, and then because of the martial law, we can't even go to courts. So I would like to end with this very positive note that, Indigenous women have developed really ingenious ways of responding to violence through colonization, militarization, racism, capitalism. What Luther said as the quad of the violence which is continuing, whether it's Akwesasne, or whether it's in Tuareg area, or whether it's in Veras area, in Tuku's area. It is, I realize, what is happening in our countries, in our cultures, is exactly, they are playing by a certain rule book of defining who we are, which we all know. It's a concept of modernity, the way they define it, in which they have called all of us as actually savages. You take up a book in sociology, you take up a book in political science of what is modernity. They neglect our history. That's why Mama Bear said, our history needs to be written. Our history has been actually blanked and blacked out. Next. Yeah, next. Next. Yeah, so this are how women in Manipur patrol the streets at night. Again, really powerful, but that there is an agency. And as again, it is not just about women as peacemakers, but also women as political agents. But again, when it comes to peace talks, women are not. There are 17 peace talks in the northeast of India, and not a single indigenous woman is made a part of the peace talk. And at last year convention, we resolved that no peace talks in the northeast of India without the indigenous women. We have taken the pledge that we will boycott any peace talk without including us in this. So with this, I think I will end in the interest of time and give the back. So the couple of recommendations are, as we design this thing, first of all, we realize that we should have look at indigenous ways of peacemaking. Let us build treaties which we do not honor each other. Have treaties which we really honor, not the ones which has been done to cheat us. So we should have, and I was really inspired by Mama Bear's presentation, in which she said, why should we wait for the indigenous men? Because even in Northeast India, chiefs are all men. They are not women. So why wait to go to the chief to say, hey, I think the idea which is coming here is, we can sign our own treaties amongst all these wonderful women today in discussion with our people back home. We don't have to wait for our men. Of course, we will consult them, but then we've been neglected out. So that was one wild idea which came. And of course, the importance of truth and reconciliation committees in a way we define. And thirdly, nation states make a lot of indigenous people fight with one another. And nation states have always come to be the negotiator. We don't trust them. So what I was thinking was, can we create a body where if a Naga and a Manipur fight in northeast of India, Mama Bear can come to us and say, hey, stop it, because only then can we understand one another. Peace building has been very top-down centric approach, where we have been just used to actually, in a way where our decisions are not being respected, our customs and histories are not respected. So with this, I will end, and I'll hand it back to the chair of this session.
Thank you, Bina. That's a a wonderful suggestion. And I think we're going to turn it over to our panelists, both from this session and the morning or earlier session, to talk about what are the next steps. How do we move forward as Indigenous women to create treaties amongst ourselves, amongst our communities? What are our next steps? And I'll just open the floor to anyone who wants to say a few words.
So I'll, if I can, so I'm just looking at time. We have 5 minutes before the session closes, and Larissa will be very strict. She has told us. So we have 5 minutes, and I had requested Sister Vera, one of our Global Advisory Board members, to deliver the closing prayer. So we will give the last word to her. But I have been taking notes throughout each of our suggestions. So if everyone allows, I'll just quickly read them out, what I've scribbled, the notes of everyone, and then this is just a draft, and we can continue working on it. And if there are additions that can be said. So just one of the important points which came out was that several indigenous regions of the world are heavily militarized, the recognition, and there exists systemic discrimination, and lack of all this kind of recognition, lack of political participation is what I have been recording from many of our speakers. The other thing that I've also realized is that there is peacemaking has been done at very high levels where indigenous people are outside. And Mariam has really brought that out clearly, and many of us. And this current transitional justice system, and even at the UN level, that is not really taking the considerations. And people have asked for, I think Mariam has very strongly pointed out, why we will have to create, particularly this year, as well in the years to come, an indigenous, a committee or a group to address the lack of indigenous people in conflict resolution processes at the UN and other international platforms, was what I heard and noted. Women leading treaties negotiation and the need to honor was something that has come about very, very strongly. And the resurrecting history of indigenous women as a story of peace, as demonstrated by the Peace Mother shared by Louise Hearn, Mama Bear, was also something which really resonated very strongly. And again, Rauna's point, decolonizing the narratives of our history, decolonizing what is, green energy, which actually hurts our own, people without pre-prior informed consent. In the climate change narrative is something that I have also noted. Tuku clearly mentioned, or I think Vera, on lack of legal recognition of indigenous people's rights, and asking our nations to sign to the UN UNDRIP declaration. The issue of ecocide was very strong, again, by Rauna, on genocide, ecocide, which is happening in indigenous lands and territories. And a very beautiful thing was also which I think Lucy and also Mama Bear mentioned about global, there are schools for war, but not for peace. So what about a global indigenous peoples, forum or school looking at peace, justice, reconciliation, which are led by indigenous women and youth, again, youth, which is really, again, taken by Lucy had really clearly said. And I think the Indigenous Women's Fund, which is there, I think we could to recognize what FIMI has done, recognize the good work that our people, others have also done to bring us all along together and to enlarge this to the larger community. We should also send these recommendations, as I think Maria mentioned, to the UN Permanent Forum, whose focus this year is on peace, conflict, and things. So these are some of the, and then documents, we should have alliances with universities. We call upon Harvard, Columbia, any other university to really ensure that the stories and the struggles of indigenous people around the world and also in all around the world are made an important part of curriculum and not relegated to the last entry point in a reading list. So I think we really have to get that, and indigenous ways of women and peaceful resolution of conflict as demonstrated by the Ched Tamashak, I know of Tuareg people, I think she has really, and then the Mairapavi movement of Manipur, the Haudenosaunee Women's Peace, the Mana Wahine of the Maori, as Claire has beautifully pointed. I think we have so many really incredible, unique models, which we are hearing for me for the first time from many of you. So I think we have so many. And one controversial thing comes from Mama Bear, mothers, a mother's law. It's not controversial. Mother's military is what we have to consider. The mother's law, So can we create this mother's law and treaties led by women and reclaim our agency back to reclaiming this? This is some of the things. And with this, I'm going to hand over, if anyone else has any comments. Again, this is one of the first convening. Please feel free to convene and we will join if others are doing it, but we will continue this journey. I'm just mindful of the time, and I will clean up, type up these and send it to all of you, and for feedback, comments, until we all together finalize this. If this is okay, then I will hand over to Sister Elvira to give the closing prayer.
Oops, sorry, I forgot how to unmute. Okay, I'm going to do it in my language. That's the best way I know how. So, onegi ale ya kahewe ne ai the wali wa hodu ne wani salad with the waka ayo jinio to hagi jinoni the wanaki le suma. Ayawa sagwe kuskana aga hagi jinue. This is what the one to get near to Akniwani Gilatana Onagi Ungiri Wahodan and Uwani Salad. So I just said that we gathered to take a look at what's going on in our communities, and I'm sending you peace, wishes of peace as we close out this meeting. I hope you get back peacefully. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Raquel, I would like to also thank Larissa, who has been with us, doing all the technology work and also in the planning. Shushma, Jane, you will be listening to us right now. You have been incredible support to make this happen. To all the people at Harvard who believe and trusted us. It started with a conversation. Shelley, thank you so much for being there. And I wish I'd known you last year, as I mentioned. And so we planned this together, journeyed through this together. The HUNET program is something, it's like I feel a home for all Indigenous people. So feel free to contact and to be able to know that we have a home there. However elitist Harvard may be, but it's still, and we still want to ensure to be places where decisions are made, where we would continue to prick the conscience of people if they are not including our story and our voice. So, and thank you to the students who are transcribing this from the beginning to the end. I wouldn't remember everyone, but Alexandria, and all of you from which Jane had brought to us, they are students who have been transcribing this meeting. The meeting is being recorded. It'll be transcribed and shared to all of us. If there's anything that you feel that you want to, that we will, look at it, and everyone agreed, and we can release a document. So I think Raquel would like to, say the last word, and Shushma too, if there's anything, and then to end it.
Well, I would just like to say, thank you so much for your contributions. We have learned a lot, and I really hope this is just the beginning of a really productive conversation. So thank you so much.
Shushma, would you like to?
Thank you so much, Bina, and all of the speakers today and the organizers. For those who are watching this session, we will post the links to the various organizations and the various resources on that page as well, in case you would like to learn more. Thank you all so much for joining us.